Hello and welcome, everyone. My name is Jennifer Junkemeyer-Kahn. My pronouns are she, hers. I am the manager of engagement with the Inclusive History Project that is housed within the National Center for Institutional Diversity, or as we lovingly refer to it, the NCID. I'm excited to welcome you all here today for our symposium, Engaging the Present, Envisioning the Future, 20 years of scholarship, practice, and community that is marking the NCID's 20th anniversary. Before our programming kicks off, I'll be setting the stage for us and our discussions by providing NCID's statement on academic freedom and a land acknowledgement. I'd like to remind everybody that the National Center for Institutional Diversity is committed to uplifting the voices and works of academic experts and higher education practitioners. To do this, we draw upon academic freedoms as outlined in the American Association of University Professors 1940 Statement of Principles on Academic Freedom and Tenure, SACUA Senate Assembly Statement on Academic Freedom, and our institution's Standard Practices Guide on Freedom of Speech and Artistic Expression. Some perspectives expressed during this event may differ from those of the NCID or the University of Michigan. We are dedicated to presenting a forum for these perspectives to deepen and broaden our knowledge of the subject matters being discussed. Additionally, I want to acknowledge that the University of Michigan is located on the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe people. In 1817, the Ojibwe, Ottawa, and Potawatomi nations made the largest single land transfer to the University of Michigan. This was offered ceremonially through the treaty at the foot of the rapids, which is also known as the Treaty of Fort Meigs, so that, as it states in Article 16 of this important treaty, some of their children may be educated. Through these words of acknowledgement, their contemporary and ancestral ties to the land and their manifold contributions to this university are renewed and reaffirmed. If you'd like to learn more about this history of Native American dispossession, ceded treaty lands, and the transformation of indigenous land into university property that quite literally made the University of Michigan, the Inclusive History Project's foundational 1817 project offers powerful new research on this history. You can learn more about land acknowledgements and the research IHP is engaged at the Inclusive History Project website. Here you can find ways to get involved and actively participate in the Inclusive History Project, which, for those of you who may not be familiar with our work, is a university-wide multi-year presidential initiative to honestly and critically re-examine the University of Michigan's full past, stretching across the university's campuses at Ann Arbor, Dearborn, Flint, and at Michigan Medicine. The Inclusive History Project is working to examine received histories, recontextualize existing narratives, center previously ignored stories, and bring more of UM's history forward to help us collectively work towards institutional transformation. Leading the work at the Inclusive History Project and the NCID is who I have the great honor to welcome to the stage next. Dr. Elizabeth R. Cole is the University Diversity and Social Transformation Professor of Psychology and Women's and Gender Studies. She is the co-chair of the Inclusive History Project, the director of the National Center for Institutional Diversity, and our beloved leader. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Elizabeth Cole.
Thank you so much, Jennifer. And I want to thank all of you for being here to celebrate the 20th anniversary of the National Center for Institutional Diversity, the NCID. It's my great honor to serve as the director. I follow in some really big footsteps, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to this celebration. I can't overstate how wonderful it is to see so many dear friends and colleagues here from over the years. To me, one of the most important things to come out of NCID is this enduring sense of community among scholars and practitioners who believe that scholarship, and I mean that broadly, I'm talking about specialized knowledge, tested evidence, and the arts, that scholarship is the foundation of building a more just and inclusive society. It's a community that connects scholars across campus and across the nation through our events, our programs, and convenings. Sometimes it's a virtual community, and surprisingly, sometimes those are some of our most meaningful engagements, as the technology that we had to make do with during the pandemic now allows us to regularly bring together scholars and practitioners across disciplines, across geography, and importantly to us, across institution types. The NCID is a multi-generational community where we mentor and collaborate and learn from one another. We challenge and support each other to achieve our best work, and we take joy and comfort in each other as we do this work over the long haul. And it can't be overstated that this kind of work can only be successful over the long haul. And so that's why it's so significant that today we're marking 20 years of the NCID and 20 years of that work. Today's an opportunity to hear from people who've been deeply involved with the NCID since its beginnings, to hear them reflect on their work's impact, and to think about together what it means as we go forward. As you'll hear more about today, starting with the keynote, the NCID was founded in a moment of optimism. Optimism that the University of Michigan could live up to our ideal of providing an uncommon education to the common man and woman from every walk of life, and that we could lead those efforts nationally by sharing the lessons that we've learned from this work. But I don't have to tell you that today we face a different atmosphere, a time when the gains we've made feel at risk and the future feels uncertain. Conversations that I've had in the last year with two wise colleagues at NCID have helped sustain me through these times, and so I'd like to share some of those insights with you. Last winter, I spoke with Pat Gurin, who I'm sure many of you know. She served as interim director of the NCID for a year before Phil Bowman took on the role after a national search. She told me, she is an elder colleague, that she was alive during World War II, and at that time, we didn't know that the Allies would win the war. You know, that's obvious, but hearing her say that in a first-person way really stayed with me. And she lived through the 1960s when we didn't know that the Civil Rights Act would be passed. It was incredibly comforting to me to remember that great uncertainty is not unprecedented. We can acknowledge that uncertainty at the same time that we keep moving forward. And NCID is still here to support you as we move forward together. And then last month, at one of our community conversations, Elizabeth James, who I'm sure many of you also know, a longtime DAS staff member, reminded us that we often look to the past and see legacies of repression. But we also need to remember that we have legacies of resilience. So today's a day to remember, or for some of you, maybe to learn about that resilience, to understand it more deeply so we can draw strength and inspiration from it, and to celebrate it. And I also want to celebrate the fact that even in times of peril, the University of Michigan remains a leader in this kind of work. And because of that, NCID will continue to support it and the scholars who do it. Seeing all your faces here this morning, and I'm seeing more people come in as I speak, which is lovely, it makes our strong and sustaining networks tangible and visible. And I think you'll see that a theme that's going to run through our events today is that the support, joy, and even love that members of our community have shared at the NCID. We hope this day will be a chance to reconnect, as well as to make new connections to each other, to our shared legacy of resilience, and to the work that is yet to come. So now it's my pleasure to introduce my longtime colleague, I'll say also my classmate, and my former department chair, LSA Dean Rosario Ceballo. She is professor of psychology and women's and gender studies. She's an NCID alum. She was a member of our first cohort of NCID fellows. And she's long been an advocate and supporter for us. And we're just grateful and delighted that she's able to be with us here today to share some connections about her connections to NCID and her continuing commitment to its impact. Thanks.
Good morning, everybody. Liz, thank you so much for those remarks. They were wonderful. And thank you to everyone who is making this day possible. I talked to several people this morning about how important it is that we're all here together for this incredibly special event and celebration. I have to honestly say that it's hard to believe that NCID is celebrating its 20th anniversary. That makes me feel kind of old, but we're not going to talk about that, okay? Over the past 2 decades, NCID has been at the forefront of supporting scholarship that is rooted in a capacious understanding of the word diversity. Diversity that captures the beauty and the richness in our differences, and that pushes us to tackle difficult, often challenging questions. In a world that has provided lots of support for mainstream research, and that is research that is at the center of our disciplinary fields, and I want to give you an example. From my own field in psychology, the center of the field would prioritize research on universal traits, factors that can apply to many people, all people, in exactly the same way. In that context, NCID rose on our campus as a champion and an incubator for interdisciplinary research, for research about disparities, marginalized populations, and the differences between us. NCID encouraged scholarly questions that fall outside of our discipline center and nurtured research with real-world implications. Can I just add that NCID did that before it was cool, before it was valued? As the Dean of LSA, I'm incredibly proud of NCID's pivotal work. I'm also grateful to both NCID Director, Professor Liz Cole, and to our Provost, Professor Laurie McCauley, for their work in support of NCID through what has been a very unusually challenging time that none of us could have predicted. Can we clap for them? Thank you. In the College of LSA, we're delighted to welcome NCID back to its LSA home. We know that NCID elevates our stature as a college and enriches our academic community. A teacher once told me that knowledge can be and should be is often personal. In other words, knowledge is particularly powerful when it's personally meaningful. It seems fitting, therefore, to share how personally meaningful NCID support has been to me as a scholar and as a researcher, as I know that that's true for a lot of the people in this room as well. So I was fortunate to receive funding from NCID as, somebody said an inaugural, I'm not sure if that's true, but as a faculty fellow a long time ago. Don't say how long, decades ago, I received funding as a faculty fellow. As an associate professor, NCID funding allowed me to pivot my own research plans, to pursue questions about culture and resiliency among Latinx youth, questions that felt very deeply important to me, but ones that I didn't dare pursue before tenure. Later in 2018, my colleague, Professor Debbie Rivas-Drake, and I once again received funding from NCID to support a collaboration among social scientists studying Latinx youth and families from various disciplinary perspectives. We were one of 4 new NCID Think Act tanks that year. Debbie and I knew that there were other faculty on this campus studying Latinx youth and families in the social sciences. We knew we weren't the only ones, but there were numerous obstacles that interfered with our ability to collaborate, to join resources, to dialogue across disciplinary divides, and to engage in collaborative work. NCID believed that we could circumvent those obstacles and supported us in developing a community of scholars. We developed a working group of 12 faculty members with disciplinary expertise in education, political science, psychology, psycholinguistics, social work, and sociology. And for over 3 years, we met regularly, yes, often with food, over lunch, to discuss our research and tackle research dilemmas. We included graduate students. We developed resources for parents and teachers of Latinx students. We organized a seminar series with external speakers on topics that address things like immigration experiences, deportations, and family separations. And finally, whenever I have a free second, which honestly feels like never, We're working on the final stages of an edited volume soon to be published by Oxford University Press with the title Growing Up Latinx, Drawing on Community and Culture to Face Contextual Challenges. So to this day, NCID is very personally meaningful to me, as I'm sure it is, again, to so many other people and scholars at in our community, in our college, and at this university. The power of NCID to turn scholarship into individual and institutional change is precisely what makes NCID so special. And it's what makes its impact over the last 20 years so significant. NCID promises not just to cultivate scholarship, but to build a launch pad so that our research can be done not in isolation, the way we felt long ago, but in a community with other scholars with the same values and principles and goals and ideals, and with a reach that extends far beyond our own classrooms and our own institution. So perhaps no one is more responsible for the success of NCID and our ability to support the importance of diversity and scholarship than Dr. Philip J. Bowman. Dr. Bowman is a towering figure in the fields of theoretical and applied psychology and an esteemed institutional leader who has helped shape the instruction, practice, and scope of numerous centers, departments, and schools here at the University of Michigan since he first arrived, I hope it's okay to say, as a graduate student in 1970. When Dr. Bowman returned to Ann Arbor in 2006 to lead NCID, there was an open question. How do we translate the research produced by institutions like the University of Michigan into actionable policies and practices for governments, companies, and organizations? At the time, there was no roadmap for that type of work. There were many great ideas, but they weren't united as part of a singular vision. Thanks to the direction of Dr. Bowman, NCID has achieved that kind of vision, and over the past 2 decades has formed the processes and practices to take exciting new scholarship from a multitude of perspectives and turn it into real change. So in closing, while serving as Dean of LSA, I promise that I will strive to protect and uphold our core principles of faculty governance, academic freedom, inclusive excellence, and the centrality of research across the liberal arts and sciences. I look forward to supporting the continued great work of NCID, the people who make it possible, and the ideas that give it life. And it is now my great pleasure to turn things over to our Provost and Executive Vice President for Academic Affairs, Provost Laurie McCauley.
Thank you, Rosie. And really, I just want to give a special shout out to you, Rosie. I remember distinctly twisting your arm to be the dean of LS&A and thinking, what a great period this would be for our university. And, who would know this last year has been quite a moment in higher education. Leadership is so important now, and I'm just so appreciative of your leadership. So thank you. Integrity, respect, inclusion, diversity, equity, innovation. Those are our university's core values. I actually had somebody yesterday ask me, it was somebody fairly newer to the university, if we were going to develop core values. And I said, we have core values. And despite so many things that have changed over the last year, we still have those core values. And that's something that I reflect on. And we still have NCID, and that is a celebration. So happy 20th. As you all know, and you've heard, NCID was created more than 20 years ago in response to questions about the benefits of diversity and ways of achieving it. We were informed by founders who recognized that research on diversity could be expanded beyond social categories and that institutions become stronger when they take on an evidence-based approach to understanding the human experience. That commitment has carried forward through every chapter of this center's work. And what stands out to me is the impact that NCID has had. So I look back on the history, and I've been here for more than 30 years, but it is really the way that NCID has continued to expand its impact. Its emphasis on inclusion has helped the university create a scholarly community that is broader, more rigorous, and more connected across disciplines. It's also created community across generations, as you heard Liz talk about, and that intergenerational lens has been really one of the greatest strengths of NCID. The center's dedication to research has been essential. Through its programs, NCID has advanced collective understanding of what diversity is, how it operates in institutions, and how it shapes lived experience on our campus. A great example is the Diversity Scholars Network. NCID launched and maintains it not only as a networking and professional development platform, but as a way to amplify emerging voices and connect them in a wider community of scholars who are asking ambitious and really timely questions. We also see NCID's influence in the way the university recognizes excellence. The James S. Jackson Distinguished Career Award highlights senior faculty whose scholarship has transformed the world's understanding of access and opportunity. The University Diversity and Social Transformation professorships honor faculty whose teaching, research, and service confront institutional barriers and push our community forward. I was recently asked if we still were going to be having these recognitions, and the answer is yes. Both of these remind us that knowledge can reshape society when it's guided by courage and clarity. NCID's leadership is strengthened by its commitment to sharing ideas with the broader public, and we see that through Spark Magazine, which I think is not 20 years old, but is one of the beauties of things that have unfolded over the 20 years. The university owes a great debt to NCID for its role in creating leaders. Many people who pass and who have passed through NCID go on to shape the university and the academy more broadly. From Rob Sellers to Scott Page to Kim Liana, who began her trajectory here as a graduate student, NCID has served as an incubator for people who approach difficult conversations with clarity, evidence, and a deep sense of purpose. This is one of its most enduring contributions. This moment calls for clarity about values, and that's the way I started my remarks. Across the country, concerns about academic freedom and free speech are ever present, and those bedrocks of the university are often mischaracterized, misunderstood, and distorted for political ends. The NCID has been a really steady voice in this space. The center's work consistently demonstrates how to have hard discussions while maintaining integrity. The center has shown how evidence can guide debate and how a university can uphold its mission even under pressure. Those commitments actually parallel work that we are doing now during our theme year of a life-changing education and reinforce my commitment to protecting inquiry, scholarship, and the exchange of ideas. So as we celebrate this 20th anniversary, I hope we can keep joy and optimism really at the forefront, even as higher education is navigating tough waters. And that's something that I think NCID also does well, and I know Liz mentioned the optimism. The work of NCID has never been solely about responding to challenges. It's always been about building something better. It's been about cultivating scholars who ask courageous questions, strengthening the fabric of the university, and creating a foundation for the next generation. I want to take a moment to thank the many people who have shaped this center. Thank you to the 20th Anniversary Event Committee, to Lester Montz for his vision and investment in the center. Thank you to Pat Gurin, who's not here, but I'm hoping is watching online, for her contributions across our campus. And I can say personally, she was a huge support in the School of Dentistry and our pipeline programs. Thank you to the directors and faculty leaders of NCID, including Philip Bowman, John Burkhart, Tabby Chavis, who, by the way, I miss seeing in my office, and Liz, for your lasting contributions. And thank you for all the staff, past and present, whose work has sustained the center's mission for these 2 decades. NCID represents what we aspire to be as a university, a community that listens, learns, and advances knowledge for the public good. I'm grateful for everything the center has done and everything it will continue to do. I look forward to Dr. Bowman's keynote. I look forward to the celebratory nature of today, and I look forward to it being a bit therapeutic, at least for me, perhaps for others in the room. And with that, I will turn it back to you, Liz. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Laurie and Rosie, for those reflections. And now it's my pleasure to welcome our keynote speaker, Dr. Phil Bowman. Rosie, Dean Ceballo already did a very nice job of introducing him, but I'll just add a few more things to that. Professor Philip J. Bowman is a theoretical and applied social psychologist. I don't know if you said that, whose scholarship focuses on higher education, racial and ethnic diversity, and related public policy issues, including workforce inequalities, urban family poverty, health disparities, and social justice. As Rosie shared, Dr. Bowman has deep roots at U of M. He finished his graduate degrees here in social psychology, but what you may not also know is he then went on to a postdoc at ISR, the Institute for Social Research, which is really kind of a jewel in the crown of University of Michigan's research program. He then left for faculty appointments at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, Northwestern University, and the University of Illinois at Chicago, and then returned to U of M in 2006 as a professor in the Marshall Family School of Education. He served as founding director of the National Center for Institutional Diversity between 2006 and 2013, and then retired from U of M in 2024. So we're super grateful and excited that you're joining us here today. Phil Bowman, along with early steering committee members and key stakeholders, laid a strong foundation and frameworks for which future NCID directors, including myself, could build upon. And I'll speak for all of us at NCID when we say we're immensely grateful to be living in and contributing to the vision for which Dr. Bowman and others set up NCID 20 years ago. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Bowman.
Good morning, and I'll advance some slides here to structure some of my reflections, but it's so wonderful to see so many members of our NCID community here. And the slides that I'll kind of share will just hopefully provide me an opportunity to kind of reflect on the kind of history of NCID and the NCID story, so to speak, as a foundation for the subsequent panel discussion. In some ways, the rationale for NCID is robust. It was the rationale for establishing NCID, and I think it also is a robust rationale to maintain the vibrancy of NCID in the present and to continue the tenacious work of NCID into the future. And these three, just to remind, us of the vision and the ethos of what we were all as a community collectively working together to advance, was to address complex diversity challenges facing higher education and other major social institutions within the U.S. and beyond. The belief that institutions need research, models, support, and resources, and also the belief that national diversity challenges require strategic institutional partnerships, both internal to the campus as well as strategic partnerships with external stakeholders. Why NCID created at Michigan? I think there's these two, major reasons that Michigan became the place for this national center to emerge. The first one is a long history of institutional commitment to diversity at the University of Michigan, and also the strong diversity leadership that existed here. Michigan was one of the first universities to admit women, for example. So there's a strong commitment to diversity at the University of Michigan. Obviously, there's been some trials and tribulations historically, but I think we can all be proud that Michigan has long been noted, for standing up for its core values, and NCID is a product of that. I think the second reason why NCID was created at University of Michigan is the historical context, the strategic shift from affirmative action to institutional diversity agenda following three kinds of historical social political events. The first one was the 2003 Supreme Court decision on the U of M affirmative action lawsuits. The second was the 2006, more proximal to the state, the 2006 state proposal to ballot initiative that banned affirmative action. And three, the 2007 recommendations from U of M Blueprint Task Force that was appointed by President Mary Sue Coleman and Provost Teresa Sullivan at the time. Scott Page, I'm looking at Scott Page, and it's almost like yesterday, that he was, one of the core leaders, as part of that effort. And in fact, I think perhaps the seminal idea for this blueprint, I think, if my memory serves me right, Scott was certainly implicated in that, like he's been implicated in a lot of good trouble over the years. A brief history of NCID, the origin from 2004, 2005, a gathering of campus and external support. In 2004, there was a meeting of 100 campus leaders and the formation of a steering committee. Between 2004 and 2005, there was a planning group that obtained a Ford Foundation grant, support, and initiated dialogue with higher education organizations such as the Association of American Colleges and Universities, the Association of American Universities, the American Council on Education, the College Board, and the Committee on institutional cooperation, or CIC, Big Ten Universities plus the University of Chicago network. In the winter of 2005, there was a strong commitment from, again, President Mary Sue Coleman and Provost Teresa Sullivan for basic kind of infrastructural needs, which really was fundamental, to the efforts to mobilize the leadership network that ultimately gave rise to NCID. In May 2005, there was a national planning conference on future and diversity at the University of Michigan that provided a set of recommendations for NCID. So the seminal idea, for NCID emerged from that planning conference. And that planning conference was headed by national diversity leaders in a variety of social networks. A brief history of the early development for NCID between 2006 and 2013, which was the period of time that I had the honor of working with the NCID community to launch this agenda. In 2006, in January, people have mentioned Patricia Gurin, and she certainly was central in all of these efforts. Was named as the NCID acting director, and developed some initial programmatic activities, and also was supportive and involved in the national search for a founding director. In June 1960, a national meeting of directors of diversity programs was held at U of M as part of its national leadership role to discuss priorities and for cross-campus collaboration and the early plans for NCID. In the fall of 2006 to 2013, I was hired in 2006 as the founding director and developed a strategic agenda between 2006 and 2013 in collaboration with other University of Michigan campus leaders. The kind of agenda, one, as founding director, was to clarify core priority areas. We couldn't do everything, but we had to, clarify the priority areas that would end up guiding our work. And then secondly, to work to mobilize the campus strengths. University of Michigan is a powerful institution, and I believe in strength-based work, and we had an embarrassment of riches here in Michigan in the sense that there's all the 19 schools and colleges and other units here are world class. So we were able to mobilize campus strengths and also to connect with collaborators. And then the three, to build strategic campus and external partnerships. Again, this was not a work of a charismatic leader. It was the work of groups of stakeholders who believed in this idea, who were held responsible for advancing the University of Michigan's core values during this important historical moment. Indeed, to move this new center further toward national and international prominence. That was the early kind of agenda setting parameters. NCID early campus leadership and steering committee under the leadership of President Mary Sue Coleman and Teresa Sullivan, Lester Motts was the visionary. Lester Motts was the person who guided, if you will, the kind of central support for NCID as Senior Vice Provost for Academic Affairs and Senior Counselor to the President. And then in addition to Lester, he was instrumental in mobilizing an NCID steering committee that consisted of a group initially of 30 campus leaders with strong commitments to institutional diversity, including senior faculty, administrators, center directors, and 4 deans, including, and this group included Scott Page and John Burkhart, who you'll hear from next, along with Lester Montz in the panel discussion. But this group of early campus leaders were my partners in the good crime that ultimately led to the establishment of NCID. And I cherish the collective work that we were able to do. The NCID steering committee between 2006 and 2013, here are the members. I did put an asterisk by, again, John Burkhart and Scott Page, who you'll hear from subsequently. But as you can see, we had a number of deans, including Paula Mears, who was dean and professor of the School of Social Work at the time, and a set of other, people had mentioned James Jackson, who I've worked with since the time he came here at the University of Michigan in 1972. As a graduate student in psychology, we pushed for James to be hired, and he trailblazed from that stage and has left a profound legacy here at the University of Michigan. But James was also a member of this steering committee, along with, as you can see, a distinguished group of other campus leaders from the entire campus, all 19 schools and colleges, as well as other units. But this steering committee was essential to the development of the NCID agenda, and any success that I was able to make was certainly supported, by the kind of partnership and collective work with this steering committee. The NCID toward a strategic agenda. There was a 15-page document that I developed as kind of a guide that included the kind of vision, the goals, and an action plan in collaboration with Lester Montz, in collaboration with the steering committee, and in collaboration with other campus leaders. Just to summarize, as Elizabeth Cole mentioned, at the center of this was the core U of M values and 3 kind of related NCID goals. And the broader, kind of idea that guided everything was to bridge exemplary scholarship with campus innovation and multi-level engagement, from local to national to global engagement. The first goal of exemplary scholarship was to really support basic, and Lester always made sure that we included the arts, but basic research, creative endeavors, and engaged inquiry. The professional schools are not ivory towers. They're actually engaged in the work, in various community-based constituencies. So basic, creative, and engaged inquiry represented the kind of ethos of scholarship. And this inquiry was essentially carried out collaboratively with decentralized NCID faculty, fellows, and scholars. And we were very intentional about being very clear on the kind of objectives as well as the kind of outcomes that we were committed to as part of the planning and implementation process. The goal, too, was exemplary campus innovation, with inclusiveness being a core value, but also partnerships and mobilizing and benefiting from the strong campus leadership. This, too, was decentralized with a set of NCID stakeholders and leaders. So at that time, NCID was based in the Provost office, but we did the work locally, we did the work. Institutionally, we did the work in a very decentralized manner, in collaboration with the deans, directors, and the angels, if you will, the faculty leaders, who believed in this work, and we're doing great things, already individually. And I think what the NCID was able to do was to cull and kind of mobilize that work in a more intentional, collective way. 3, exemplary multi-level engagement, where again, we established linkages through outreach and partnerships toward an agenda of social change. And this was also done in a very intentional way. As part of the, kind of planning process, we certainly had an analysis and planning strategy where we were, aware of the threats in the external environment that we were operating against. We were aware, that, any institution has, places where, there could be improvement, but most important, we built on the strengths of the University of Michigan that were plenty, and also looked externally in an agenic way for opportunities that were available. So the emphasis was on strengths and opportunities and navigating through and building capacity in any areas that needed further development, and also to be hyper aware of the threats that loomed then and still loom now. But at the end of the day, and I'll kind of end with this at the end. But as Martin Luther King said, the moral arc of the universe is long, but it bends toward justice. So despite the struggle, we were engaged in, I think, what we all considered righteous work. The NCID early mission statement consisted of some values and aims on the one hand and an approach on the other. The values and aims was the new National Center for Institutional Diversity represents a strategic commitment by the University of Michigan to address complex diversity issues within higher education and other major social institutions. NCID was inspired by the vision of higher education's crucial role in promoting knowledge, justice, and opportunity in a diverse democracy and global economy. NCID aims to prepare people for active engagement in a diverse society and works toward building productive as well as inclusive communities at the University of Michigan and beyond. So our guiding values, that was very clear aim, and everything we did was to pursue those values and aims. The approach was the NCID, was to focus on exemplars, models, excellence that were rife in the university, and also externally, not randomly, but look at those things that were exemplary, those things that offered a good motivation to replicate and build and expand in other places. But exemplars of diversity scholarship, multi-level engagement, and innovation by operating as a catalyst, a venture fund, incubator, a clearinghouse, a publisher, and a think tank. Strategic NCID partnerships bridge scholarship and social change through engagement at multiple levels, at the campus and institutional level, at the local level, at the state and local level, at the national level, as well as internationally. The core priorities and activities focus on challenges and opportunities of diversity in the broadest sense, the broadest, richest sense, including the diversity of viewpoints. NCID core practices and strategic partnerships guided by an evolving strategic agenda. The center's national leadership role focuses on a set of 4 core research, education, and outreach values. To 1, investigate the value of diversity through multiple perspectives, interdisciplinary perspectives, diverse group perspectives, to identify, evaluate, and support exemplary education institutional practices for pursuing the benefits of diversity, to cultivate and moderate public and academic discourse on diversity, and to anticipate, prepare, and plan for an increasingly diverse and interconnected world. These core priorities are enacted by building 2 types of partnerships. Again, it was collective work, and we systematically built partnerships both on the campus as well as externally. NCID's early priorities and collaborative strategies was again kind of strategic alignment with decentralized U of M campus strengths and external partners. The core campus priorities and collaborative strategies, we collaborated with the deans, especially those who had these strong commitments, became, kind of the center, of the guidance and the implementation and the mobilization of the resources, directors and diversity leaders to build on strengths and priorities within U of M campus units to promote innovation, exemplars, and change. Also, with regard to kind of core external priorities and collaborations, we were aware, that of the social political environment and the kind of pressing diversity challenge and opportunities of the time. We collaborated with multi-level partners, again, at the state, national, and global levels to address these pressing challenges and opportunities. The decentralized organizational structure at NCID it represented a kind of distributed leadership, with Lester's support and the support of the president and the provost, and my role as director was set up to kind of mobilize a decentralized organizational structure of distributed leadership, where leadership really, was coming from the body of the campus itself. We organized a very strong staff at NCID. As I mentioned earlier, the steering committee was robust and guided us with wisdom through every stage of the process. And fourth, a decentralized distributed leadership network that consisted of NCID campus and external partners, deans, directors, advisory networks in all the schools and colleges and units. And also, most important, faculty-centered leadership. Faculty was at the body and at the core of everything that we did. In addition, other units, programmatic units, also were allies in this process. The early programmatic activities that U of M, that NCID was able to advance during my tenure as the founding director of NCID between 2006 and 2013 was we started off with a couple of sponsored projects and affiliated programs, that were already, in existence, and the Provost office and Lester provided strong support for youth dialogues on race and ethnicity in metropolitan Detroit, as well as the Global Intercultural Experience for Undergraduates program. Those two became part of NCID as a home, after being supported in a more looser way fiscally by the Provost office prior. And in addition, there were some strategic campus and external partnerships, again, really centered on faculty mentoring, senior faculty, junior faculty, postdocs. We had kind of a and graduate students and undergraduate students. So we had a very intentional, kind of multi-tiered, kind of pipeline that we organized and kind of supported. There were also some exemplary scholarship and engagement awards. We recognized leadership and excellence that was rife, on campus at the time with NCID awards, both for scholarship and people involved in more in practice, in more grounded practice. We organized some critical issues, forum series, and also working groups to kind of focus on specific issues where the agenda was problem solving, developing proposals, sometimes with external funding, sometimes with seed funding from NCID, but to address any critical issues that were pressing at the time. We also co-sponsored exemplary events and provided some venture funds, for ideas that emanated from stakeholders in the community and engaged in kind of multi-level, outreach, as I mentioned earlier, at the local, state, national, and global levels. The faculty and center fellow program, including scholars and practitioners, we, in addition to faculty, also connected with those who were doing God's work, out there in the community. Diversity conversations and a distinguished lecture series was organized to promote, kind of discourse and exchange. We also engaged and supported collaborative research, training, and development program. We built a strong partnership with the advanced program, for example. These were kind of existing research training activities. And as I mentioned earlier, Lester, made sure that we, always were guided by the kind of creative inputs from the arts and social change programming. And we had a series of national meetings around the kind of core priorities, challenges, and opportunities where we brought in top people from around the country and globally to advance our work. And we were also able to get some external funding. We had a National Diversity Research and Policy Project that was funded by NIH and received, at least I think 5 years with some supplements from the National Institutes for Health, National Institute for General Medical Sciences in particular. And then we were very, very working with the campus resources for marketing communications, very, 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 very intentional about promoting this work through web-based and print and other media. The inaugural NCID faculty and center fellows who did the work in 205 and 206, these were two groups. The first kind of two cohorts, and you'll see again Tabby Chavis and our LSNA dean. He was very prominent in that first group, along with a set of others as part of the 205 and 206 cohort, and also the 206 and 207 cohort. Additional annual NCID fellow cohorts were selected every year that I served as director from between 2008 and 2013. And current U of M faculty leaders participating in today's panel discussions. Again, I think we'll have at least Tabby was listed, as well as our dean of LSNA, Rosario. Implications for the early NCID agenda for the present and the future. This was an interesting exercise, just to kind of think about and kind of reflect on where we are, and where we need to go. And I think one of the questions that I posed, that was posed, and I posed for myself, was: is University of Michigan still positioned to address the gaps and challenges that NCID was designed for? These are challenging times, and we do have to kind of review and kind of think through. And the answer is a resounding yes. But historically unique social political challenges, we do face indeed historically unique social political challenges. And I think they require individual, institutional, and collective resilience. Each of us individually, in small groups, in our employment and kind of personal and organizational networks, these are trying times that require resilience. But it also requires agency and resistance and action strategies. So in my own opinion, NCID is still positioned strategically to promote this struggle, if you will. But again, it will require individual, institutional, and collective resilience, agency, and action strategies. A major challenge, well, again, we have faced some historically unprecedented challenges. Well-organized conservative backlash against the very ethos of NCID and other progressive activity or egalitarian products of the civil rights movement. Really are personally discouraging. We find ourselves, having to, maintain enthusiasm in trying times, but also systematically threatening to NCID and other egalitarian products of the civil rights movement. Time-tested strategies. Historical leaders such as Frederick Douglass taught us about addressing such threats with adages like, if there is no struggle, there is no progress. I often times whenever I'm feeling kind of shaky, I invoke Frederick Douglass: where there is no struggle, there is no progress, and reminds us that we do have power, individually and collectively. We do have agency. But as Frederick Douglass also cautioned us, power concedes nothing without a demand. It never has and never will. Agitate, agitate, agitate. So I think it's very important for us individually and collectively and NCID to be a place, to kind of promote such a resistance, if you will. Implications of early NCID agenda for the present and the future. Well, in the future, how might current NCID stakeholders learn from the early NCID foundations, core principles to help guide us into the future? I think, just the thought, current NCID stakeholders could develop formal and informal conversations about early NCID foundations and core principles to help guide. I think it's worth, the Sankofa looking back to move forward is a very, very powerful, it always has been. It's very time tested. And I think it's worth, especially young, I'm often struck by how discouraged young people are. They're coming into this thing during a time where things are confusing, they get discouraged. And we, the elders, don't always, kind of provide them with a kind of wisdom of the past. But I think it's very important. One role for NCID is to develop formal and informal opportunities for conversations. Cross-generational conversations, even more robust, to talk about not only early NCID foundations, but the core principles. To help guide us in future strategies. A few closing thoughts on what our collective next steps might be. And I'm, always, again, during those personal moments of discouragement, Mara Angelou is invoked. Still we rise. That ethos, is extremely important. I mentioned Martin Luther King earlier. The moral arc of the universe is long, but it bends toward justice. These kinds of adages are very, very important, I think, for us to be empowered by, despite the challenging social political environment. University of Michigan, as an institution, it still has amazingly talented faculty, staff, students who share NCID core values. This is perhaps our biggest strength, our biggest resources, the soldiers, if you will, the comrades. And again, NCID and other U of M stakeholders could develop and should develop formal and informal conversations about individual, programmatic, and institutional strategies. To legally, we are in a contested terrain, but to legally preserve, protect, and promote NCID core values in the face of very discouraging backlash. We face those periodically in history. And as I mentioned, the adages of Martin Luther King and invoking Mara Angelou and Frederick Douglass, these are very important. These are very important, at least for me, to kind of maintain the agency despite the discouraging social political environment that is often very, very challenging. Okay, those are my reflections, and I would look forward to future questions and discussions. Thank you.
Can we give Dr. Bowman another wonderful round of applause? I will take liberty. I guess I should start by introducing myself here, as if everybody knows me. I know you all don't. I'm Edmund Graham. I currently serve as the Associate Director for the NCID, and I'm incredibly grateful to be in community with you all here this morning and leading into the afternoon. A quick reflection about Phil Bowman, and I think this applies to many other folks within the room. I tell this story in certain spaces, but I was admitted to the University of Michigan as an undergraduate student, but chose not to come here, mostly because I grew up in Michigan and wanted to get to a warmer climate, so I went as far away as I possibly could. But I didn't have the language at the time, but it was also something there about a sense of belonging, like Michigan not being a space where I felt as though I can belong, coming in here as a 18-year-old. Fast forward many years later, I get to campus and I meet many wonderful folks. One of those people is Phil Bowman, Dr. Angela Ebrio. I was completing my dissertation at the time, and they invited me to join a dissertation group along with some of Phil Bowman's students. And so you sort of look at this sort of career sort of pathway, 14, 15 years before, it was a space where I didn't feel like I belonged, but many thanks to folks like Phil Bowman, it became a space where I felt like I belong. So I'm greatly indebted to Phil and Dr. Ebro and many other folks for welcoming me into this space here today. So thank you, Dr. Bowman. We have spent a little bit of time putting this event here together. I wish that we had talked to Phil so we could get that long running history, because there's a gap where we can't find things in the files, and I think he was holding it all in his brain. And so we'll be sure to sort of document, take that recording, and put it in our files for the 20 years from now. Part of the motivation for this event, from my sort of perspective, is to sort of think about this in many ways as an act of resistance, to still sort of be here and still to do to be doing critical work, supporting faculty that ultimately engage with, support students, and then those who sort of engage in the public spheres and the educated lay audiences is sort of critically important. And to take a moment to celebrate and exist and live in joy, I think is really important for us to do. We also spent a little bit of time sort of thinking about, like, what is NCID's story? Like, how do we sort of understand, like, the beginnings of NCID? What were the sort of motivations for why the center exists? What does impact look like outside of sort of the measurable? So we can talk about the number of folks who attend the event, and we can talk about the multiple millions of dollars that we have given over, the past 20 years, or we can talk about the 400 plus people who have sort of been connected to the NCID in some way, shape, or form. But I don't think that sort of gets in between, like, the nooks and the crannies that talk about like how for some the NCID has been a familial space. A critical space of support where other spaces on campus were not able to be that. And so we wanted to sort of document that a little bit as well. We also wanted to think a little bit about the future. And so what might the NCID look like 5 years, 10 years, 20 years from now? Building upon the legacies of the Phil Bowmans, the John Burkharts, the Tabby Chavises, Liz Coles, so on and so forth. So we have a little video that will maybe speak to that. I hope that you all enjoy as we sort of reflect together about NCID over the past 20 years.
I came to the university as Vice Provost for Academic and Multicultural Affairs in the fall of 1993. The Michigan Mandate, which was a strategic plan for diversity, was in full force. We were challenged by these outside groups for what they saw as violations in our undergraduate admissions. Lee Bollinger was the president, and Lee Bollinger decided to challenge it. We went to the Supreme Court. We were able to put forth that evidence, and they judged in our favor. We adopted the admissions process from the law school and applied it to undergraduate admissions, and we're off and running.
When Proposal 2 was passed in 2006, and I remember our steering committee gathering at that time, there were hugs and there were tears. But I also remember at that very same meeting, everybody around the table said, we need diversity blueprints.
We came up with the idea, well, we need a think tank at Michigan. And as you know, with ISR and other think tanks on campus, Michigan already had a reputation for pulling people together to discuss the critical issues of our time. And we went to the Ford Foundation for some seed funding to have this gathering of people on campus and people nationwide to discuss, how would this NCID idea take shape? And as a result of that, President Coleman okayed the establishment of the NCID.
We were approaching this with an understanding that almost anyone could make a leadership contribution, that the more diverse our leadership pool was, the better the ideas would result.
It has been the only site for me on campus in my professional life where a combination of devotion to research and a devotion to designing programs and initiatives to act upon research came together.
At the time, the conversation, well, what's next? What is Michigan going to do next? The narrative on campus was that we successfully defended the campus and our practices around affirmative action. So what's next? How do we level up? And NCID was supposed to be the answer. And I think it has been the answer to that question.
What NCID does is helping people find purpose and joy. And I think part of that is building community.
The existence of the NCID is really unique. what the NCID does adds a lot of value to the community and the wider scholarly community.
It was such an amazing team. It really, like when I think about NCID, it was the family. It was like true family feeling, and we were all doing a lot, everything, because we were a small but mighty team.
Like Catalina was saying, when I look back at our inaugural groups of faculty fellows, it was the dream team. It has changed me for life, and that I'm a better leader and more quick to elevate others, especially those who have been excluded.
And I thought right then, this is how this is supposed to be. This is what education looks like. This is what taking care of students looks like.
Starting in the master's program, I think NCID has been my home. Academic home is where I learned to do research. There were moments through my journey where I didn't feel like I had that space to explore my own research and my own interest. And NCID has always been the place where I felt included, welcome, supported.
I became NCID director in 2022, and at that time, the university was embarking on its DEI 2.0 plan. Historically, NCID has been open to supporting work in all areas, but we've really mainly worked in the social science area, and I had aspirations that we could do something broader. One of the values that I also wanted to bring was democratization of access, and we do that through the DSN and through the Cascade program, because the idea is that these tools for how to empower change agents, give them knowledge, give them skills, are available free of charge. There was also a national movement where universities were trying to understand their history, and eventually we were charged by Mary Sue Coleman to start an inclusive history project that would involve studying all three of the Michigan campuses, Ann Arbor, Dearborn, and Flint, with an eye to not only understanding the past, but thinking about ways to create repair.
When I think about the context in which I started my work with NCID, we were doing lots of support for undocumented students or immigrant students at the University of Michigan. Unfortunately, I think we've circled back to a time in which we're thinking about all of these policies related to immigration status once again. This also shows the cyclical need for programs like NCID, who may learn the first time they deal with the political issue, only to have to come back and build on those lessons at a future time.
The immigrant rights work that we were doing is one of the things that I'm most proud of, because it really started as a convening where we gathered people from all over the country to talk about ways that we could support undocumented students.
Through convenings, through reports, through advocacy. I'm proud to say that the University of Michigan came to be recognized as a leader in this policy debate as related to DACA.
When I look at what the NCI is doing now, it's not something that I had envisioned. It went far beyond that. The networking, the various programs, the increase in the expertise of the staff, it is just something to behold.
I'm very pleased to observe that NCID continues to provide clear leadership under Elizabeth and Tabby and others.
And it's still my ambition that on the other side of this, we are going to be able to take up our work more robustly because of the care and the stewardship that we're doing now.
Being part of this community has enriched my life probably in more ways than I even know. There are probably more connections that I've made through NCID. And then not to mention like the Diversity Scholars Network too, right? So that's a really important aspect of what NCID sustains.
I would like to see the NCID become a model for similar kinds of centers on other campuses. So you can strengthen the network in terms of at the institutional level, as well as the person, the scholar, the practitioner level.
I'm excited to think about what the next 20 years hold for it. NCID has built infrastructure and programs that provide us with the ability and capacity and support to build our work, especially when that work may not otherwise be funded or otherwise be supported at some of the systems that exist.
Even when it's tough, and it's tough now, and it's a great reminder to be joyful, to be optimistic, to look for a better future.
I
hope that NCID will continue to inspire future scholars, leaders, people who really break the mold. I hope that it is a place that continues to take risks.
Anyone involved in this has to continue to work hard, even amidst resistance, to say, no, this matters.
NCID at the beginning was an act of hope and faith that we could continue to get better. There's just a different way of thinking and different way of connecting ideas and people that I think NCID does really, really well at. I don't think there's any other entity in the country like it.
When I play this recording for my family, I would tell my daughters that applause was for me and not for the video there. But thank you all for your attention to that video. There are a couple of things that sort of resonate with me as I have watched it many times and have sort of engaged with folks to sort of collect the stories along with other NCID colleagues, including Emma Ceballo, who is not here today, and even getting emotional to an extent and feeling sort of really sort of inspired and motivated to sort of carry forward the work, despite the sort of moment that we are in at this particular point in time. So a couple of things that stand out to me. NCID, as Dr. Locks pointed out, is sort of operated from hope and faith. I think that current and perhaps past NCID sort of staff and affiliates might feel as though we are always operating on hope and faith, and that we are sort of building things as we go. But as I sort of spoke with Dr. Locks in the sort of atrium out here, that is by design perhaps, and that we are sort of responding to any sort of, at any given time, a socio-political context in which we don't know what is in front of us, and we are trying to operate within that as a way of advancing the work and I always borrow from Dr. Sellers, seeking to improve the overall human condition, and that requires us to sort of act courageously, sort of live in the moment and respond to what's in front. So to our team, it stems from our ability to be sort of agile and being constructed in a way. The other pieces is around community, which I think is sort of critically important. We cannot sort of function and operate as individuals and be as successful as we would hope to be. And so I'm incredibly grateful that NCID, past and present, and hopefully moving forward in the future, we continue to be a space where folks find community to sort of engage in this critical work. With that, we have some lunch outside, and hopefully we can continue to be in community with one another. When we exit out of the hall here, there is lunch on both sides near the elevators. There is no programming during lunch, and so I do have an ask, even though that there's no programming, because we are in community with one another, and because the NCID as part of its sort of mission is centered around this intergenerational engagement and thinking about collaboration, so on and so forth. Perhaps, greet an old colleague with a tight, warm hug as a reminder of what this sort of space has been to you over time. Perhaps you find a graduate student in this space as a UDSTP member and build a connection in some sort of a way. Maybe we can conspire a little bit over lunch and think about what the possibilities and opportunities are for us collectively as we share this space. And that's my little bit of homework over lunch. We'll reconvene with the panel after lunch. So many thanks to you all for your time and attention and continued engagement. All right. Welcome back from lunch. I think that for anybody who has to break up good conversation and food, that is the absolute worst job you can have at any point in time. But I hope that you all are sort of, filled with food and sustenance to sort of make it through the rest of the afternoon. We will continue on with our sort of set of schedule of events here, moving on into a panel discussion featuring esteemed faculty and colleagues and luminaries and visionaries of the NCID. I will get to those introductions here in a second, but maybe give you all a little bit of background in how we are sort of thinking and conceptualizing the panel here. There is a substantial amount of institutional knowledge that is concentrated within the folks on the stage, but also within the audience as well. We are all also very mindful of the current sort of social and political context, and we are all affected similarly and differently by that particular context. But this is not new. It may be new in some ways, but each of the folks here have experienced this over time. I'm thinking about Dr. Chavis and leading the NCID during COVID, for example, right? And so that was something that was new and never experienced before by us, and thinking about how we navigate that. So this is a question about vision. This is also a session about leadership as well. How do leaders make the decisions that they make, and how do they navigate the particular context in which they are operating in? I also hope that we can spend a little bit of time thinking about sort of vision for the future, and like how we can imagine what the NCID might look like in the future. Engaging in a little bit of sort of reflection about what we have seen. What might we be able to sort of glean from that and apply it into future context here. And so with that, I will begin to introduce the panelists. Because they are who they are, their bios are incredibly long, and so I will spare you all from reading them. I'll just stick with the titles, but those are, in some cases, equally as long. So I have allocated 15 minutes for this portion of today. But I'll start immediately with my left and move on down the row. We have, he told me to call him Lester. This part isn't recorded, so my mom won't hear me calling him Lester instead of Dr. Montz. But we have Lester Montz, who is the Arthur F. Thurnau Professor Emeritus of Music and Ethnomusicology. He's a former senior vice provost for academic affairs and senior counselor to the president for the arts, diversity, and undergraduate affairs. We have the illustrious Tabby Chavis, who is the executive director of the American Educational Research Association. I don't know if you all have heard that. I think it's kind of new, but she now leads that. She's also a professor of education and psychology and a former director of the National Center for Institutional Diversity. In the center, we have Scott Page, who is the John Seeley Brown Distinguished University Professor of Complexity, Social Science and Management, and the Williamson Family Professor of Business Administration, also Professor of Management and Organization, Professor of Political Science, Professor of Complex Systems, and Professor of Economics. If you need an apprentice, I am happy to join you in that. To Scott's left is the wonderful Liz Cole. I have the great honor and pleasure of sort of working with Liz on a daily basis, to the point where if we don't meet, my week is thrown off. And so so it's a great pleasure to sort of work and be in close proximity to a vision like hers. Liz is the current NCID director and University Diversity and Social Transformation Professor of Psychology and Women's and Gender Study, and also the co-chair of the Inclusive History Project here on campus. Lastly, we have John Burkhart. Much like Phil Bowman is one of those folks who sort of introduced me to the campus and welcomed me with open arms. I took something from John, and I share this with my family and particularly my children. And I think this is something that might apply in this moment, where he says, it's about you, but it's not all about you. I hope I didn't steal your thunder and you were planning to use that at some point in time. But I think that sort of goes with sort of thinking about about purpose and community and how we sort of situate our potential impact outside of ourselves and focusing on the broader possibilities. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Scott, and we're going to kick this panel off. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Edmund. Let me first just, thank Edmund and Elle and Liz for putting this together. It's odd to think that this would be considered bold or audacious, but in some sense it is. So let's just, give it up for them for a second. I want to start, Phil put up this list of people who were on the initial steering committee, and one thing he didn't point out is on that list were 3 people who became university presidents, and then Alec Gallimore, who's kind of sloughing it as provost at Duke, right? So it was an incredible group of people, right, that were put together to get this thing launched. And you could feel not only the kind of the intellectual firepower within that group, but this just deep sense of mission. This was not a bunch of people trying to build resumes. This was a bunch of people just trying to make the world better and trying to make the world better by making the university better. And the person who really spearheaded that, at least in my view, is sitting on my far right, Lester Montz. And Lester, so I'm going to start with you. Like, what was, you need a visionary, right? You need a vision. And so, you were kind of in that role when you thought about this administratively, intellectually. How did you think about that? And I think particularly important, I think, for people in this room to think about what was the climate like then, right? So it's, we've been talking a lot about what the climate's like now, but give us a sense of kind of what your vision was and how that vision was contextualized within the kind of university and national climate at the time.
Sure. Thanks, Scott. And good afternoon to you all. And before I start, I just want to congratulate all the folks at the NCID for all that they've done over the years to sustain this very important center here at the university. I mean, from Phil Bowman to Tabby to Liz to John, all these folks. I mean, when you put this NCID puzzle together, you see these big hunks of the puzzle that they put together and maintain. And another thing is that I would venture to say that I'm probably, I don't know, maybe I have to compete with Phil, but probably the oldest person sitting here today. And it is really heartwarming to see, folks who were first-year assistant professors years ago assume these roles of leadership and to make this institution and this center what it is today. And with Tabby going off to head a national organization, Liz stepping up to become director, the work that John did, it is really, really heartwarming. I mean, this is one of these, when you in your late 70s, you say, this is going to be a good sleep night, all right? So let me begin and just sort of back up just a bit because a lot has been said about, sort of the start of the NCID. But let me go back. I came here from the University of California, Santa Barbara, where I was dean of the college. And we had a system-wide meeting of all the deans and provosts and so forth. And one of the speakers was a fellow named Robert Weisbuck. Some of you may remember him. He was a professor of English here at the University of Michigan. And he started talking about all of the things happening at Michigan with regard to diversity. It had to be like 1991. And he mentioned this thing called the Michigan Mandate and how it had been ushered in by former President James Duderstadt. And Duderstadt's motto for the Michigan Mandate, which was a strategic plan for diversity. The motto was linking social diversity with academic excellence as the mission for that strategic plan. And it was very successful. By the time I arrived here in 1993, University of Michigan had been fully activated by some of our students through these Black action movements. And so they set the groundwork for various demands that had to do with increasing the number of minority faculty, increasing the number of minority students. And the Michigan Mandate was working in that regard. And it became nationally known because, as said, Weisbuck talked about it at length at this conference. And so the number of underrepresented minority students began to rise. The number of faculty of color began to rise. And so that was all going on. Charles Moody became the second in the nation vice provost for minority affairs. The first was at Ohio State. Okay. But a lot was going on. And so when we came, we just sort of took up the reins to move things further down the road. And we had a lot of support at that time, okay? And a lot of that support came from the faculty. I mean, luminaries like Pat Guerin, Bunyan Bryant, Mark Chesler, Paula Allen Mears. I mean, it just goes on and on and on. That generation of faculty administrators did some really good foundational work. Now, the success was so great with regard to diversity on Michigan's campus that we attracted a lot of detractors. And they began to question, why is this happening? Why is that happening? And before you know it, we're in the midst of a lawsuit, a set of lawsuits, as Phil pointed out earlier today, against the law school's admissions process and the undergraduate admissions process. We went to the Supreme Court, but in the process of all of that, many of the higher education associations, the HACU, the Hispanic Association of Colleges and Universities, AAHE, I'll just give you the alphabets, okay? AACNU, the Council on American Education, it just went on and on. They began pouring in these amicus briefs to support our case. It also came from foundations and other universities and consortia. And so we had a lot of support. And they all considered Michigan sort of the leader out there. So when it came to the point that we actually won that Supreme Court case and we were able to make some adjustments in both the law school and the undergraduate admissions process, and we go to these meetings at NCORE and we give these presentations. We go out with the people from the General Counsel's office to explain to alums, what was happening at Michigan with regard to diversity and so forth. And but the question remained, what next? And so we basically said, okay, the window is open, the door is open for Michigan to do something spectacular. And so we came up with the idea of a national center. We didn't call it that at the time. So we went to the Ford Foundation, as Phil pointed out earlier, and we asked for money. Now, let me just say, this was a strategic move because the Ford Foundation, I think, gave us $900,000, $100,000, and back then that was big money. We could have pulled that out of our budgets. But we wanted a national foundation to sort of serve as a way of bolstering the need for this center. And so when I went to Mary Sue Coleman, who was president at the time, and by the way, my title was senior counselor to the president, but it was actually the other way around. She was counseling me. All right, I'm coming, Scott. She was coming to me and saying, we need to do this, this, and this. And so the center was actually born. Now, one other quick thing, and I'll just finish with this. We've sort of identified the glory of the NCID. There was some stuff going on behind the scenes that you wouldn't believe. And so, again, it's the perseverance of the folks who took on leadership roles to push this forward, all right? And I just wanted to put that out there because otherwise, without that sort of perseverance and skill that it took to lead this organization, this center, wouldn't be here today. So I'll leave it at that.
Thank you. Just echoing that a little bit, and one thing when I look at these, 4 people up here, one thing that they all have in abundance is just personal strength, right? And just this resilience. I know with working with all of them, and I think that, Lester, you embody that so much. And I want to turn to Tabby and Liz. I mean, you're both early kind of faculty fellows here. And one thing that came up today, and I think one thing that's so important about the center is we think of the university as kind of like research, teaching, and service. And oftentimes diversity centers really focus more on kind of like the teaching and service side. And we've really led with research. And, and Liz, you talked about this so eloquently this morning, as did Phil. Just the research. And you and I were talking at lunch and just how important it is to do the research. So could you talk a little bit about how your experiences as fellows and then as directors of the program, you thought about the importance of research and how the research helped lead to building the community? A little bit. Easy question.
You're looking at me, so I'll start, you know. So, yes, easy question, but an important one. I just want to start by, I will take every opportunity that I will ever have to thank Lester Montz for, you know, his bravery, vision, and, you know, just innovation in pushing forward. You said you were being advised. You were advising a lot of people. Many of us would not be here if it weren't for the things that you were doing in front of and behind the scenes. And, you know, as I think about who I was as a, you know, an earlier career scholar, I did not go into, you know, the academy thinking I would be doing anything administrative at all, like leadership at all. Just like I thought, you know, research. I'm a researcher, and I truly believe that research could help change the world. And I still believe that, otherwise I wouldn't be doing some of the things that I do. And so the vision that you had for NCID, and that all of those who were on the steering committee who helped construct the vision, I experienced that. You know, I came into a space where I was interested, for instance, in looking at conceptualizing and measuring the ways that organizational and racial climates affected students. And I was doing it from a psychological perspective. Got one of my first little pots of money from NCID around, you know, some of that work, and you know, but also became a part of a fellows community that put me in conversation with people who were not only in psychology, because there were people like Phil Bowman and Pat Gurin connected to the work, but also people who were not in my field at all, who brought, you know, different lenses, you know, around the work. We would connect and talk about our research, different types of research, but it pushed you to really think about, you know, a social, a structural, you know, multidisciplinary lenses on your own work. It stretched us to think about what part of the system that we work on and what parts of the system do other scholars work on as well. It was a legitimizing, you know, which, you know, we still have to legitimize the kind of work that we do, or fight for its legitimacy. So this was a space where you didn't have to explain why your work is important and why, you know, you study people of color and why that was not a, you know, a narrow thing or a niche thing, that people were serious about the work and the complexity of the phenomena that you were studying. You got pushed as a scholar in ways that you would not be pushed in other spaces. And it was a space where, you know, again, while people were still sneaking around, not wanting to say diversity out loud or other words, where you could say that loudly, proudly. It wasn't just do-gooder work. It was work that was intellectually grounded and that was serious, and you were getting pushed seriously on your ideas too. And so to me, that was the dream in terms of what the academy should be doing with and for scholars. And the other piece is you were pushed to talk about how your research is useful. So, you know, beyond like, oh, it gets into a journal, you know, clearly we had to meet the demands of our disciplines. I was in psychology, and, you know, that's not a space where you're like, oh, public engagement work was not the, you know, the currency. But that was a space where you were thinking about both. You were thinking about, you know, the kind of quality of the research, design, measurement, but you were also thinking about what and who you're impacting with the work. So to me, my own experience with NCID shaped what I did as a director. The community that I was in was primarily junior scholars. And so one of the things that I was quite excited about, building on the foundation of Dr. Bowman with the Diversity Scholars Network, which started out as a program that really yielded people through our postdoc program. And we have some of those prestigious postdocs in the audience, William, the two Williams, you know, and among others. That, you know, one of the things that I was excited about doing, which I know we'll talk about a bit, is engaging a broader range of scholars, including senior scholars. I had the opportunity to connect with the leaders of NCID at the time, Phil and Pat, you know, before, and the scholars that they connected me to. But I also thought that, you know, this network would benefit from expanding to, you know, a broader swath of scholars who also, you know, included senior scholars where the intergenerational kinds of connections could happen too. So I would just say that, you know, my experience and what I saw as strength. There are things that I did as a director to maintain those strengths. So how do we continue to signal and support through funding, seed funding? Yeah. Sometimes some of the ideas that our scholars were trying to get off the ground required funding that was, that would allow them to then access and leverage other types of funding as well. And so building that into the structure even more intensely, and then creating opportunities for scholars across area to not only talk and learn about each other's research, but to build community as people and as humans too. And I would credit like my experience in NCID and all of the people who, who did vision work on that to the things that I was able to move forward as a director.
Liz, let me tighten the frame a little bit for you in the sense that, like, two things that you've done that I think are just so incredibly important. So economists often quote Keynes, who says, when the facts change, my opinions change, right? And two projects you've been involved in, one on intersectionality, the other on the Inclusive History Project, have brought a whole bunch of new facts out on the table. And without those, kind of, in some ways, I mean, I guess, Rob Sellers would define this as almost like new dimensions of facts that we weren't even looking at, kind of widening the aperture. To what extent did NCID play a role in that? How have you thought about, with your own experiences and kind of amazing successes in those two different venues, as director, how did you think about building communities around ideas, generating not data so much as information, facts, understanding, lenses, that sort of thing? So it wasn't framed that well, but how have you thought about, as director, creating those kind of big successes?
You asked great questions, but you took that in a different direction than I was expecting. Well, maybe let me start with the interdisciplinarity. When I came to Michigan, I was recently tenured, and although my discipline is psychology, my position here was in women's and gender studies and in DAS. And both of those are units that are predominantly humanists, and also historians, which can fall into either category. And I wanted to be there. I wanted to do interdisciplinary work. I wanted to do interdisciplinary teaching. But what I also found was that being out of my discipline made it harder to engage in the important conversations. And so my time as a fellow at NCID was, I can vividly remember sitting around that table in the conference room with Phil at the front of it, kind of asking questions and writing on the whiteboard. And so it was a place that I could come to the table and have those scholarly discussions, as Tabby described, because it wasn't happening for me in a more targeted way in my own departments. And I think that's one of the things that's been really important about NCID. It's been a place for people to do this work and do it well who haven't been able to find that places wherever they might be located. And so in some ways, I think the community gets built around these topics. Often the topics that we're thinking about at NCID they're question or problem driven. They're not disciplinary questions. And the IHP is a great example of that. So I don't know if anybody's been thinking about this, like, why is a psychologist co-chairing this project that's on history? And I kind of had that question at the beginning too. But I saw really quickly that this project had the capacity to make culture change. That project is set up around the ideas that we're going to research, we're going to engage the community, and that is going to generate ideas and possibly opportunities for repair of what's happened in the past. And so that work is grounded in the kind of research that historians do, but that's a place for all of us to be. And we have leaders and PIs on the IHP that come from all kinds of disciplines, but I think all of us see how we understand the past plays this huge role in materially shaping what we can do now, and that part of making change is to revisit that and try to understand it in a more complete way. You gave the example of when the facts change, my opinions change. I think what we do at NCID is we are researchers, and so the facts are very important, but what doesn't change is our values and the commitments that bring us there. I don't know if I'll go too much into the intersectionality thing, but I would say that's another place where you see people coming together from many different disciplines and trying to make something new, trying to make new tools for activism and new tools for scholarship. Because just like Tabby said, just like research can change the world, one of the ways it does that is by giving us frameworks to understand what's going on and to make changes. And I think my role in that field has been trying to translate those humanities ideas into the social sciences. And I think that's another place where NCID's been effective. You know, we're not only interested empirically, but we're interested in frameworks. We're interested in using the literature to create those frameworks and then using those frameworks to ask better questions and to do programs and interventions. And so it's incredibly fertile and it's exciting. And I guess I'll just end by saying, you know, it becomes this home for people who aren't finding a home where they are, but not only because it's a warm space or a welcoming space, but also because it's a space that people find they can do their best work.
One quick follow-up to both of you, and we were talking about this during break, is that the way you both describe this, you're kind of fighting against a culture of the H index. A little bit, right? And the academy's all about like, how many papers did I write? How many citations do I get, right? And you're talking about kind of an academic life of purpose, right? And creating this sense of community. How do you do that with young scholars, you know, in running this? When people come in and they're thinking, I'm at Michigan, I want to stay at Michigan, or I'm at Wisconsin, I want to stay at Wisconsin. How do you be like, be chill, do the important work, not as a leader?
Do you mean
like when you have a young scholar come in, they're excited to be at Michigan, and in some sense, you know, you're saying, do this thing that's important, right? And it may mean that you're not, if you're starting something new, you're not going to get the citations you're going to get if you're just feeding off a literature that's having 100 papers written every month on that exact same topic. So,
Yep.
so how do you create that courage in a young scholar?
I think when we're not, you know, I guess my orientation is that always that we were not trying to create martyrs from these young scholars.
No, that's right.
And I was thinking one of the things that I was very excited about, and I think that was a kind of critical piece, a part of programs like our Collegiate Fellows program, is that we were literally recruiting scholars who wanted across fields, in the social sciences, biological, physical sciences, who wanted to use research to change the world and use their positionality as faculty and their teaching and their engagement to change the world. Now, in thinking about that, you know, there's this narrative of, you know, wait until after tenure and this will get in the way. But for those types of scholars, they nourish one another. Like their creativity around their intellectual curiosity around their topics is nourished when they're thinking about engaging their work. And in some cases, it's bringing science to the public, or in their work, or interventions that draw on those scientific principles, or other forms of public engagement that get the research in the hands or in the decision-making spaces as well. And so there's a lot in the mentoring structure around that. There is a discussion about, you know, meeting the demands of your discipline, being able to carve out, like, what's your public service work that's just your personal work that you actually don't want the university to have a say over, to work that you are defining as scholarly impact, and then providing frames and language for describing that work as not just service, just service, because service is important, but it's often, you know, relegated to this is a form of scholarly impact. At the same time, be very clear, you need to be checking with your chairs, your mentors around what are the frameworks and the criteria for publishing and those traditional journals. But, you know, we literally find that they are not, you know, one is not at the expense of the other if people are really thinking about building those things in and time management around the ways, you know, around things that they would do anyway. So you make decisions about how to manage your time. You can't do everything all at once. And so thinking about the work of engagement in a similarly kind of systematic way. What skill sets do you need to develop to do this work effectively? How can you think of ways to do it that are actually complementary to your research and teaching, you know, in ways that, you know, you're not spending like totally separate time doing it too. And so there is mentoring and development that goes into that. But I was very, very, very clear that the message that was never going to come from me was that, oh, you shouldn't think about any of those things until after tenure. When it's miserable, my analogy was always, which I never should say, like, you could get hit by a bus tomorrow. And I was like, I need to stop saying that. But, you know, the idea that you have to wait to do life purpose work when many people that are going into this field to bring others into it who haven't been able to access it. But you also have to be just as strategic around your planning, time management, skill development, understanding the parameters of what's expected in your field and discipline, and being able to articulate how the work is actually scientifically grounded and impactful too. And those metrics, you need to pay attention to them as well. So it's more work, but it can be done in a strategic way where it feels more nourishing to a scholar than a feeling like they have to put an important part of themselves on hold.
Sure. I mean, first I'll say I have always felt that having a clear purpose comes out of who I was raised by and how they raised me, and that's a privilege, because things do get hard. And for me, having that purpose is always clarifying and orienting and sustaining. And I do feel that the people that I mentor, I often attract people who feel the same way. They're here to do this in a bigger way, the same goals that I have. But what I'll also say is, I mean, everything that Tabby said, but I'll also add on, I've often talked to young scholars and said, 6 or 7 years till you get tenure, it sounds like forever, especially because you spent that long in grad school. It's nothing. Like, you're going to get tenure, and then you're going to have 30 more years, right? So one thing I try to do is just give them that perspective, which is also a privilege of being this age and having gray hair.
Bill and I are going to get mad.
But I'll also say chasing the H index does not necessarily have to be at odds with trying to change things. I mean, there's kind of a paradox in that we're all here to create something new as scholars, to show that we've made an impact, to show, these are my unique contributions. And if you're just following the crowd, it's harder to do that. So the very nature of the job is you're kind of trying to balance going outside the old models while showing that you kind of understand the rules of the game in your discipline. But to go back to, you had talked about my work on intersectionality, I wrote the piece that everyone knows because I wanted people who wanted to use this theoretical tool, specifically to think about women of color, to have a legitimate citation, that they weren't going to have to cite something in a women's studies journal no psychologist had ever heard of, that they could go to a place that everyone recognized. And it succeeded at that beyond, that by far is the thing that I've gotten the most citations of. So I think that also is sort of in keeping with both the idea of having a principle-driven career and also the work we do at NCID. We're thinking in a systems way, right? Like, I'm writing this piece, it is what I want to say, but I'm also writing it because I want it to have this impact and open the door for other scholars with the same interests.
And that the piece is amazing. If you haven't read it, it's wildly undercited in the sense that after that work, your work and other work was done in this space, a lot of social scientists, enormous numbers, do interaction effects between race and gender when they run regressions, right? And they don't then go back to kind of what really initially drove that, which was intersectionality, right? So you can't publish a paper on, economic performance, educational well-being, if you don't test for interactions between race and gender. That's just how it works now. And it's not going, so it's undercited, which is too bad. But next salary. It's cited a lot. It's cited a ton. It's cited a ton, but still. But so let me turn to John a second. So you were a leader of this at a really formative time. And can you talk about, you came from the foundation space, right? How did you think about making this, it's the national center? I remember when you came in, right, that this is a national center, not just the University of Michigan Center of Institutional Diversity. How did you think strategically, given your background, about being effective in the national domain?
Thanks. I've been watching a lot of news shows, and they always say, that's a good question. And it doesn't really matter whether it's a good question. It's kind of a way of buying something back from, from the interviewer.
I appreciate that.
Yeah, you got it. So I'm also going to now try and buy some of your compassion as a group because I'm with people who are really, really smart. and I can't claim that, but I can tell you this very brief story that both Phil and I taught in the Center for the Study of Higher and Post-Secondary Education, as it turns out, in the same classroom. And I came into the room as Phil finished up his lecture. And in they were green boards, I'll call them blackboards, Phil had written out pretty much every word he spoke in the context of a 2-hour thing. And, you know, Phil, that was a lot of words. And I would come in, and at best, I would circle a few and say, this is where I'm going to start. But what I realized then, and when I came in behind Phil to be the director of NCID, there's a French king that says, after me, the abyss, something like that. After Phil, chalk dust. You know, I inherited a piece of chalk from Phil that was pretty much ground down to nothing because, you know, a 15-page description of what NCID was supposed to be and a rule book I could follow was quickly followed by a real shift in context, which I think is at the heart of your question. Almost immediately upon Lester injudiciously appointing me to this role, Mary Sue Coleman announced that she was resigning as president, and the board was looking for the next president. Eventually, they chose Mark Schlissel, who started January 2014. From my leadership studies, I realized that not only do leaders have a profound influence on their followers and on their institutions, but followers and institutions shaped leaders by insisting on the kind of leadership that they would require of them. That's something we should keep in mind right now. Followers can shape leaders and their behaviors, sometimes through outrage, sometimes through mobilization, but whatever. So it dawned on me that we could change the way Dr. Schlissel came into the presidency by reasserting Michigan's role in higher education as a leader in diversity, equity, and inclusion, with the goal of not only changing the way people thought about us out there, but also changing the way we thought about ourselves on the campus, that we would claim that role that we had held for so many years. And so we initiated, even before he came, a series of convenings on the campus where we brought people together to talk about important topics in DEI, immigration, African American men and boys, culture, many others. And they weren't just meetings. We reached out, as we had in the past, both Lester and Phil references, to all the associations. And when we issued the invitations, they came from the University of Michigan and the American Council on Education, from the University of Michigan and the American Association of Hispanics in Higher Ed. That's how the invitation came. And whether they were in Ann Arbor or Texas or New York or New Jersey, we were convening the important conversations about higher education in our society. I also reached out to some old friends in the foundation world. I still had a few. And I said, we don't want your money. That's a lie. But we don't want your money right now. What we want are your ideas. And we want you to come and sit with us and to share what you're thinking, because there was an observation that I shared that foundations were taking a second seat or further from the front. And those that had really initiated a lot of our work in this field were a little less active. And so by getting those people, along with the heads of the associations and all of us and our diversity scholars, into rooms, whether they were here or, as I said, elsewhere in the country, we were able to shape and change the conversation. Now, what effect did that have? I engaged the speechwriter for Dr. Schlissel as soon as he came from California. And I said, here's what I think needs to be said. And the two of us would craft his welcoming remarks and everything else that he said from that point forward. A little lesson in leadership. Everything that was said this morning by the provost and the dean and everyone else, they believed it before they said it. But they believed it even deeper after they said it. So getting the president up to talk about Michigan's historic role in DEI created a convert out of him that then eventually he got used to saying these things to us and to others. And I think it sounds manipulative as hell. If you know me a little bit, of course it was that, right? It was about influence, because that's what leadership is. It's not power, it's influence. So that was one thing we did. And then very briefly, shortly after that point, Lesnar and Rob Sellers were tasked with writing a diversity plan. It wasn't the first one, right? We had plenty of strategies related to diversity, equity, inclusion. But the provost and others sent the NCID staff out to find out how were other people approaching diversity planning. First thing we did, like good graduate students, is we downloaded, didn't we, Matt? Everything anybody had ever pledged in this space, put it through one of those software programs where you find out what's said and how it's said, what was promised, and where did it fit within the administrations. We went to all the Big Ten institutions, which meant 12. And we also went to both coasts and studied all these planning documents. Then we went out to 4 schools in teams, and we talked with everybody on those campuses to say, what effect had this plan had? I think that shaped how we approached the planning process for DEI 1, that it was far more organic, and people like Rob and Provost and President were committed to doing something meaningful, not performative. So I tried to summarize, to even claim that you have strategy is a bit of an arrogant thing to say, really. We all are doing the best we can in the moment based on what we see and know. But in that case, NCID took a little bit of a sidestep from its focus on scholarship related to diversity to be a little bit more active in the institutional activities that were going on at that time, trying to shape the presidential agenda and contribute to the writing of the DEI plan. Sorry if that's really in the weeds, but it was the way that we used our time and our resources right then.
It's super helpful. I'm gonna pivot back to that in a minute, but first, I want to ask one last question about a bunch of you have talked about the importance of interdisciplinarity, right? And Lester, kind of led with this. Tab, you talked about it. Liz, you talked about it. How do we do it, right? I mean, how do we get law, education, psychology, economics, sociology, women's studies? How do we get those people, all in a room, get them to have a stake in these questions? And this is more, again, in the weeds, but what strategies are successful for convening and then maintaining these sort of deep interdisciplinary conversations, projects, that sort of stuff? Is it money? Is it food? Is it mission? What is it? Yes. I always think it's food.
Well, food does not hurt. I mean, people, when you try to get people during their busy times and then lunches,
Your husband has fed me a lot of pie, I'm just saying.
That is strategic.
That is strategic.
I think NCID, this is one of the areas where when I look across the history, that NCID has been forward thinking in this way from the beginning. So, I've had a lot of jobs at Michigan, in my time. I was like, being in one institution, but having like 8 jobs, administratively, and, more recently, there's been a focus on, I think, Liz's point about being a problem focused, naming challenge, naming topical areas. John talked about it in terms of the convenings, like on different topics, in order to take up the topic of immigration and its complexity. No one field or discipline can actually take that up adequately, and the like too. And so NCID has been about defining social problems, challenges, opportunities, and then who needs to be at the table to actually understand and act on those things. And I say, NCID is forward thinking because more recently, as I think about the other jobs I've had in other offices on campus, even in the Office of Research, like the kind of trend of bold challenges and grand challenges, bringing scholars together around kind of broad topical areas is something that has been at the heart from the beginning of NCID, with the acknowledgement that in order to take up these complex processes that are multifaceted, multi-layered, multi-leveled, you need people who are looking at that topic from different angles, from different lenses, methodologies, and the like too. So I think that piece and then those structures bring people together, because otherwise you'd be like, oh, we should get together when we have a chance. And we all do that, and then we never have a chance. But having structures that sometimes aren't initially about the money, it might be about a gathering with food, around a topic of shared interest. And then there's organic connection that begins to happen. And then there are seed structures like seed funding and the like to support people who want to start an engagement around those things too. I think the other feature of NCID's version of it, and I feel like I don't know if I was fully intentional. I think it's just the way I think about the world, and my predecessors and my successor after me, is that we don't think about, there are hierarchies of discipline that can come up in these. So I would say I've seen enough of the grand challenges where we're talking about, looking at technology in communities, and the tech people are really the leaders, and then we need some humanities people to help us, some social scientists to help us understand how communities think about technology, and they're not brought to the table in an equitable, your expertise is just as important or more important in some cases. And I think the way that NCID has named challenges and invited people to the table across the humanities, social sciences, and even more recently, looking at other STEM fields, is that knowledge that everyone has an equally valuable form of knowledge that brings more people to the table. If I think you have something and you just want to help you as a social scientist in the part that you don't understand, I'm not going to be as inclined to want to join your party as much as I'm actually a thought partner with you on that phenomenon. And so it's both the idea of problems-focused work, but also the way that you bring people to the table. And I would just, again, credit NCID's history and present for being forward-thinking in that way.
I want to thank John for kind of highlighting the way that work that you did as NCID director was kind of working behind the scenes to, cultivate a climate here among leadership where we could make the kind of changes we wanted to see. Because I think one of the most important things about cultivating interdisciplinarity is lowering the barriers to that. And so part of that might be, is funding available, things like that. But a very real part is, how does that work get recognized in tenure and promotion? Do we hire people like that? And I think Michigan's done a great job. Like, we have procedures in place for evaluating tenure cases for people with joint appointments and things like that. But I don't think that problem is fully solved yet. So to name an example, it's kind of similar to what John was talking about. We've been concerned about whether people who do publicly engaged scholarship get evaluated appropriately, right? That work takes more time. You got to work with communities. The outputs might be different. And part of evaluating it, of course, is first recognizing it, but the second is having the right rubrics or frameworks or understandings to evaluate it. Like, people who don't do that kind of work can't even look at a dossier and tell, how do I know it's good, right? So I've collaborated with the director of the Ginsberg Center to write a proposal to put together a task force on how to evaluate publicly engaged scholarship. And I feel like in all the events of the last few years, that's kind of been tabled a little bit. But before I leave this role, something I want to do is bring that back, because I think we're trying to create change at our own institutions. And so part of that is about equitable evaluations. And it's got to be equitable with respect to people's identities, but also to the kind of work they do and what they're trying to achieve.
What do I just quickly follow up? The fellows, I think a little bit also of how well have they functioned as creating the interdisciplinary, because they come in with a project they're working on, and they've, in looking back at what people have studied, looking back at some of the research projects, have they been pretty successful at reaching across fields while here? The things we could do better?
Well, that's an interesting question, because I think many of them came here with interdisciplinarity, but he's talking about the LSA Collegiate Fellows, which is administered through NCID. But we're trying to support those fellows to be successful in their own fields. And so maybe their field isn't interdisciplinary, or maybe they're in a field where thinking about that is not that advanced. So I think one of the conversations we have with the fellows is how to do that work, how to make sure that work gets evaluated well. But I'm not sure it's a value that we're pressing, and I think we will see more of that as the fellows start to get tenured. So we've had 3 fellows who are tenured. We started to hire senior fellows who come with tenure. And last year we did have a collaboration between 2 of the assistant professor level fellows, between someone in philosophy and political science, I believe. I might be getting that wrong. But it was clearly a super interdisciplinary collaboration that came about because they knew each other through the fellows.
Elizabeth, you've said on a couple of times already today how committed you are to this interdisciplinary. And in the video, you talk about moving into fields that haven't been tapped yet. I think this is a real challenge. And I came to appreciate, largely out of the history of higher ed, how different disciplines developed their own distinctive logic models for understanding information and turning it into change. So an engineer thinks about a change problem differently than a psychologist or an anthropologist and so on. I remember a session we had on the topic of immigration and DACA, where a lawyer said this is essentially a legal problem. And someone else in public policy, it's a policy problem, because if we change policy within 50 states, we'd have, and someone stood up and said, this is a moral problem. You might say the same thing about citizenship. Is it a legal property? Is it a property of identity? The fact is we hold on to these mental models so tightly. In fact, you only get tenured if you can somehow espouse the mental models of your discipline. That's kind of a sine qua non. So I think it takes a great deal more depth of discussion and engagement before people are willing to let go of their ways of, I'm using that phrase advisedly, their ways of thinking about our social challenges.
And I would say, I guess, one addition to that would be, I guess, there's interdisciplinary in the kind of specific research that people are doing, but there's also a way that, if we think about how scholars are using their faculty role in teaching and mentoring and in affecting the cultures of their professional fields, then I would probably have an additional picture of a program like the Fellows. So we had a scholar who is in linguistics, but took up a research project that looked at sexual harassment in the field and did work in her disciplinary society to look at that in ways that actually influenced the ways that some of her colleagues and some of the physical sciences fields were thinking about those same issues. We've had Michigan has had the first astronomy department to get any kind of, at least there's a program called Sea Change through the AAAS, American Association for the Advancement of Science, that is trying to leverage units to engage equity work by recognizing programs that have done that nationally, and Michigan is the only astronomy program that has gotten that. And it's no accident that astronomy has been affected significantly by the Collegiate Fellows program in terms of people who have been who've been recruited to that department too, who have a commitment not only to being excellent scholars, but to making their fields a more broadly inclusive place. And their conversations with social scientists and others in the program have affected how they take up their faculty work. It might not be about their research and scholarship specifically too. So I think that's something that I've been thinking about from a measurement perspective, geek in me, and how do we capture how the faculty role and what types of work, because often this cultural tax for certain kinds of scholars to do certain kinds of work becomes more distributed across people and fields, which is different from the scholarly collaboration piece too. It's about how logics, used John's term, and ways of working as a faculty member that are specific to particular fields can be shaped and reshaped. Like, yes, equity work and making sure that your field is not rampant with sexual harassment is actually a part of the work of your field. I mean, you don't have to be a researcher of that, but there are things that you can learn that help you conduct your own lab and that help you engage as a member of your field in that way. And I think we're doing work in that space. We have some kind of anecdotes and kind of qualitative examples, but it would be great to actually systematically kind of capture that aspect of interdisciplinarity.
Awesome. I want to pivot a tiny bit. When Edmund and I were talking about kind of what to talk about, one thing that's super important is this particular moment, right? If there's a sense in which, we've had this, I think the NCID and people in this space feel under siege a bit. And I want to frame this a tiny bit in terms of, if you look at the foundations, which we talked about, like Earl Lewis, who was here earlier, when he was running Mellon, diversity was a big focus, and now they've shifted primarily to the arts. Ford Foundation, this was their big thing, and now Michigan alum Heather Gerken's now running it, and she's pushing it towards democracy. Carnegie has moved towards misinformation, right? Now, we could argue that all of these are, be very gracious and say these are all diversity adjacent, but they're not laser focused. And I'm thinking, and so, Lester, I'm going to start with you in this. I mean, like, as the if the foundation space for whatever reason is kind of moving away from this, how do we, and also there's a sense in which the academy is being called woke and left wing and this sort of thing. Do we respond to that? How do we deal with that? Or do we just kind of stay on course? What's your thinking strategically?
I guess my sense, and I'm sure you're going to get better answers to this than from others than from me, but for me, it just seems that, as we were talking earlier, I mean, since my undergraduate days in a small school in Arkansas, where I was the only African-American student on the campus, and it was right in the middle of the most densely populated Klan area in the state. But I always felt that college had a set of values that embraced me. The same thing here at the University of Michigan or any higher education institution. These are places where I think we can do what we do best, okay? And that's research, teaching, and providing service. And how do we survive this onslaught of pressure from political groups and even our own government? I think we need to remain true, that is for the NCID, remain true in its mission statement and align it very, very closely with the university's mission statement. And so no regent, no legislator, no body can say that you're out of line in terms of what the institution means to its students, faculty, staff, and the greater society. I also think that we were just talking about interdisciplinarity. I think collaborations are such that people need to meet each other across campus. I mean, the decentralized nature of this campus really frightened me when I came here because I'm used to seeing, as a music professor, students walking across the campus with a cello case or something. You don't see that on the central campus. And so we have all of these different pockets of people who have really great ideas, who have great concept, great ideas, great values, and some kind of way we don't bring them together. And I think the NCID can be the hub of those kinds of activities, bringing people together. And I know about this interdisciplinarity stuff and how to evaluate. I mean, I probably read more tenure promotion cases in the Provost office than anybody alive over those 21 years. And I've seen people sitting around the table with portfolio from, let's say, American culture and saying, well, what is this person, a historian or a linguist or something? He's all of them and counted as such. So staying close to the mission, highlighting the things that you do in terms of research, and we've done that all morning, highlighting those things and highlight them in such a way that they have some kind of public consumption so that people understand what's going on. I don't think people, and you see this all the time, I don't think people understand that all of these advancements having to do with medicine and vaccines and so forth were primarily done on university campuses. If they realized that, they wouldn't be challenging all of these things that are now being challenged. So maybe it's a communications issue.
Yeah. But Liz, you must be getting these calls, right, from people running centers like this. Like, what do you do? What's the strategy? How, with the change in administration at the national level, with the shift from the foundations, I mean, how did you think of yourself as pivoting or just refocusing, and what advice are you giving other people in this space?
You know, I think one of the things, there have been many things that have been hard about the last year.
Yeah.
And one of the things that's been hardest is that people are asking me for advice about things that I haven't experienced before, right? Like I can't tell, I can tell my students this is how to prepare for the job market. 5 years ago,
Yeah.
I don't know now. Like we're all waiting to see, So I don't want to represent myself as kind of having good advice when people ask me about how we should handle this. But what I do really believe is that a lot of the attacks on what we've been doing are attacks on a caricature. And that the work that we do at NCID and many other places in Michigan is consistent with the stated values of the university. I mean, Provost McCauley was saying as much. And when we had talked about this question earlier, you had specifically talked about, instead of diversity, some places they're talking about dialogue and deliberation in the spirit of open inquiry. And that just frustrates me to no end because I feel like that is what we have always aimed to do here. And so one connection that I wanted to highlight is Michigan is the place where intergroup relations program got started. And people who were really key to the founding of NCID, like Packer and like Mark Chesler, were the architects of that. So when we say inclusive, we mean inclusive. I feel like part of this caricature is that inclusivity is a smokescreen for exclusivity. But I hope what you've seen today is all the different people from different backgrounds who have found NCID to be a place that supports them, that has, that they're grateful it was here and that it helped them do what they wanted to do. So some of that I feel like, it's come up across different people's statements. Like, I think we've got a communication problem. And one of the things I think we need to be doing this, I don't think anyone's solution is the silver bullet, but being able to explain why the inclusion that we practice here is genuine inclusion. And that means inclusion of different viewpoints. It doesn't mean inclusion of bigotry. If that's what they mean by that, well then, I guess I would like to make them defend that. So I don't see what we're doing as pivoting, but I do see part of what we're doing is finding new ways to talk about what we do. And, a lot of people have asked me about, so in all this crisis, where's the opportunity? And I think one piece of opportunity is we can think about our stories more deeply to be able to tell them and communicate them better, and that doing that will help, but it will also help us do our work. It's consistent with it's not just playing defense, I think. It also means thinking more creatively, more deeply, more synthetically to be able to communicate that outward.
John,
Elizabeth,
let me frame it a tiny bit. So when the university gives $50 million for an open inquiry center, are you like, woohoo? I mean, what's your...
Well, if it's our university, yeah, I'm
okay.
all in for that. But I don't even entirely know what the phrase means or what the grant implies. I do have to... You use the phrase silver bullet, and I've been waiting to say this. Everybody probably understands the music history of the Detroit area through Motown. But Bob Seger, great poet, in a Silver Bullet Band.
Oof, I had a timer before someone said...
yeah, this is short. This is relatively short. So in his song, Against the Wind, he says, I wish I didn't know now what I didn't know then. And there's a lot of that in my life as relates to these topics. I wish I didn't know now what I didn't know 10 years ago about misogyny and about racism, about people's willingness to buy into that. I wanted to say something about foundations real quickly, if I might. First of all, you got to understand, these are organized groups set aside for the most part from society that are spending resources that were gained through exploitation in the 20th century. And the money is set aside by the Carnegies and the Rockefellers and the Fords and all that kind of stuff. And then, unfortunately, we're using it to validate our ideas. as opposed to recognize these are just people pretty much just like this. I worked in foundations for a long time and I still consult with them. They're not a lot smarter than we are. They just have a whole different mental model about how change is brought about. And oftentimes it's by picking winners and losers. But we're nonetheless addicted to money here as much as anywhere in American society, whether it comes through NIH or through the Ford Foundation or other places. It's part of the tenure discussion for a lot of people. I don't think that is easily changed. I just think that that is a reality. But we do, when we talk about interdisciplinary work and young scholars and so on, we need to do what we can to protect them from the view that they need somebody in New York to suggest that their ideas are right and helpful and on point. Because foundations fund in the rearview mirror for the most part. They are much more risk adverse than most people realize. And they're just people really like us, people who work as program officers, were faculty members yesterday and will be faculty members again. So I really would like to enforce some humility on foundations. I'm not in a position to do it. I do know that the best way to begin is to not start by going after their money. If you start in a transactional conversation with a program officer, it will never go beyond that.
David, you want to add 10 minutes? How are you feeling in your new role in particular, right? Do you?
It's surreal right now. I think this word I've used a lot, but no, but I mean, I think one of the things that excited me and one of the reasons I'm in the role is because, I mean, even, you know, I thought a lot about culture and how culture is in part supported, created, reinforced through the norms of one's fields and disciplines. There's no objectivity in what counts as prestigious work. It's like we're consensus-based fields, and professional societies have a lot to do with that. You know, so if we think about our tenure and promotion, policies, they're related to the norms of the field, and the norms of the field are created and co-created and reinforced by people who are in the field. And so one of the exciting kind of opportunity spaces that I see are the roles of professional societies in both amplifying voices that might feel endangered right now. There are people who are like, I can't do and say these things on my campuses around this work, but you can take a position. So my organization's one that, you know, was a lead of a lawsuit against the National Science Foundation because of the grant terminations that were happening based on topic. And I had 2 such terminations, you know, in the spring right before I took the role. So I was like, oh, I got to be a participant in the research as well as, you know, looking at the data now and thinking about the knowledge production impacts and the impacts on the pipeline. I think professional societies are also doing things. The American Sociological Society, supported by a foundation, WT Grant, just came out with a large report and set of toolkits for evaluating publicly engaged scholarship in the promotion and tenure process. And they did in their materials cite the work of Ginsberg and other things at Michigan too. But the idea that, and then the political science and other social science fields have, you know, made statements, you know, to that effect, so that there are, you know, opportunity spaces. The Spencer Foundation is making some new investments in collaborating with a number of higher ed institutions around the preparation pathway for people to do publicly engaged scholarship. The current model is people get into their tenure track role despite their training and want to do it, but there's actually a quality and to this work, just like other kinds of work, and that are we actually investing in our training programs for scholars to actually be prepared, whether it's big policy on the Hill or whether it's community engaged work, actually with attention to training and quality as well. And so I do think that there's some opportunity spaces now that are happening. As we were talking in the hallway, we talked about the fact that it's hard to find opportunity, when we're in bizarro land right now. But one of the criticisms that has led to the reduction of research or the attack of research that is in the kind of woke category is, or generally research and knowledge and science, is that it's not connected to real people in real settings. Now that critique is disingenuous. They actually don't care about real people in real settings. But I've never met a social scientist or who's like, yes, I think we've got to figure it out. We figured it out. The public knows all about our work, and we're very satisfied with the way that the public is actually engaging in understanding our work. We actually hold that same criticism. And so during this time of push, when we need to change our structures so that we're connecting research to real settings more effectively, we actually know how to do it. We know how to do it, we know how to study it, we know how to refine it, and so we can grab a part of the ownership of that solution, agreeing, there's one place where we can agree, we actually agree there's more we can do to connect research to the public. And then we need to then take the steps of making sure that we're building that into our incentivizing system and pushing it back against the narrative that somehow publicly engaged work diffuses quality science and the like too. We're not asking scholars to be one type of scholar, but there need to be pathways. The University of Illinois, for instance, just created a specific promotion and tenure pathway for publicly engaged scholars. Now, I'm not saying that's the way that everyone should go. I'm still trying to learn about their processes, but there are attempts to actually name the specific qualities and features of particular types of work and to be able to evaluate it effectively and appropriately and rigorously, too. So I think there's a push now for research to be meaningful to publics. I think there's an opportunity space for us to own the leadership of that phase, even if it causes us to have to swallow our pride a little bit and agree with someone who's attacking us. We don't agree with the basis of your attack, but we actually do agree that there is more that we can do to connect our research with the public. And we want to actually be a part of the solution, and we actually have the better expertise. I mean, we don't have to say better, but
Tabby, I want
to know how to do it.
Reinforce and double down and
there's funding available for it too. I'm just saying, and there's funding available for it too, and there will be.
I believed that bias was an outcome, was a result of lack of knowledge or ignorance, right? And that if we informed it better, that people would change their view of inequalities, racism, poverty, and so on and so forth. And of course, because we're children of the Enlightenment, they would then act differently as a result. We have learned that is not the case. That awareness. I think we need to stop. There's a whole industry, billions of dollars spent on raising awareness for people about racism in corporate diversity training models. That's not the problem. That is not the problem. People are pretty much aware of all that. Where the bias comes in is where they translate that awareness into explanations and interventions. So I think there's a research opportunity related to NCID that we need to continue to fund our demonstrations of the relationships that comprise diversity studies, but we need to understand why people are so damn vulnerable to manipulation of their attitudes and values and political behaviors because they'd prefer not to know what they know. And they would rather substitute their own biases for knowledge. There was a time when I honestly believed that truth will set you free. Now I think truth will set you at odds with a whole lot of people that would prefer to leave truth elsewhere so they can go on and do those things. And I really do think, now I'll be quick, Scott, that this is an outgrowth of the scarcity that we've embedded in people. They're afraid of their own status, their own position, their own financial futures. And they're so afraid of that we can manipulate that fear and even get them to deny things that they know to be true. And that is a big job, and I think that that's part of where diversity scholarship needs to go next, is socially and individually. How do we deal with this in a climate where people will change the facts to suit themselves, where people will say that that particular country is a shithole, and immediately the whole presidential cabinet applauds. We've got a lot of work to do to get back to even where we were in terms of the role that awareness and commitment plan our society. Sorry for the speech, but.
No. I mean,
That was a good All right. So let's, we have about 10 minutes or so. Let's open this up to the floor for any questions people might have of particular panelists or even, quick stuff. Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, I'm just saying I have the mic.
You have the mic.
Sorry. Anyone has questions?
Anyone has questions?
Somebody grab the mic and drop it, because apparently that's like the sign of all things. But somebody must have a question for these.
We got one over here. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Dave Gordon. I guess in desperation, I have to ask a question. One of the things that I've really scratched my head about, and I look also particularly to you, Scott Page, having read some of your work, and that is what are people's feelings about not somehow communicating the competitive advantage of diversity efforts? Now, I'm coming from a health field, and when I think about underserved populations, particularly rural populations now, with clinics closing and hospitals closing and people having less access to health care, it seems to me that no way can you tackle that problem with just one discipline. You need multiple folks to come together to really not only solve things or hopefully come up with solutions, but solutions that your clients value, not necessarily solutions that we necessarily value from an academic point of view. And so I guess my question is, have we been successful in terms of really communicating that and really meeting people where they are in terms of their needs? And I'm talking about people outside the university, because it seems to me that there are a lot of people who feel like, okay, we're a bunch of elite folks, we're dealing with our own academics, and we haven't really shown how we can leverage diversity to basically outcompete other efforts. Why should the current administration even be in office? Are they in office because we weren't able to show that we can do a better job?
So first, let me say, David was an original committee member, right? And the original steering committee. It's great to see you again. And one of the many, if I had to put money down on who's going to be university president, it would have been you. But those other people got those jobs. Who does? But Liz, let me turn that to you. Let's just in particular, intersectionality. To what extent do you think that particular, view, which is so important in thinking about health outcomes, educational outcomes? You made the point. It was so important that things like psychology were focusing on the universal, which to David's point means that at best, B- healthcare in a society that's diverse. Are we getting the message across, or how can we get it across better? The point that you made, right?
I think one of the things that's challenging is that, you had talked earlier about economists being expected to include interaction effects. Yeah. That is a pretty watered down version of what we're talking about when we talk about intersectionality. Yeah. And so I mentioned that kind of as an example that, and I'll talk to you afterwards since you're a professor of complexity. I think people resist complexity. I think sometimes they feel like it's over their heads. Sometimes they feel like it's not parsimonious. And so I feel like, running against the wind, that's one of the headwinds that we face trying to make this case that interdisciplinarity offers better solutions, because they're not necessarily the simple solutions. They're not, you hear a lot of people talking about common sense. Well, one of the basic premises, I think, of thinking about diversity is that my common sense might not be your common sense, right? Right. So a complex answer isn't going to just take the common sense, because we know that that's partial. So no, I don't think we've been successful in communicating that, answers that are generated by interdisciplinary teams are better than either obvious answers or disciplinary answers. But, you know, in the end, I have a lot of faith in scholars. And, you know, most people, I think, in this field are doing this work because they believe in it, because they want better answers, right? And so I've talked to psychologists about intersectional perspectives and how important it is to be interdisciplinary. And many times they're sort of like, well, how am I supposed to know everything about psychology and everything about history? Well, you're not, you know, maybe you need to go work with a historian or talk to a historian. And so I do, you know, I see places where people are excited that these are opportunities to know better, because that's why they're here. And so, you know, barring some of these external forces, I do have faith that scholars are going to figure this out. But, you know, as we've been talking about, I think NCID is based on hope.
Yeah, you know, as you mentioned, there's a German Korean philosopher, Byung-Chul Han, whose most recent book is On Hope. And he talks about that we're in this period of like, everything's going so fast. We're in like, you know, high speed achievement. And there's a sense in which this is slow food in a way, right? I mean, we have to stop and chew on this. And, you know, David, to your point, I think that there are efforts, and there may be like, so Pat Ryan, who's been in the press recently because his family is paying for this really expensive football stadium at Northwestern, also paid for a complexity center to fund this guy Dashan Wang, who's been doing all this incredible work showing, in fact, that diverse interdisciplinary teams do the best research, right? So team is basically called, science of team science. And it's just unequivocal. I mean, you're absolutely right. It's unequivocal. Interdisciplinary, diverse teams of people, that are also identity diverse, do the best research. They do the most robust research. It has the biggest impact. They write the best patents. They have the biggest impact on society. That's just a fact. It's just not getting out there. And partly, I think, to your point, it's kind of complex. It's a long story. It's not a simple soundbite. Yeah.
It can be. I guess there's a piece of me that resonates with me. My people, the psychologists, find that there is a communication storytelling component, and then I also think there's a spine component. Like people know, but the leaders are not actually upholding what they know. Right. So from the storytelling perspective, I guess I had a recent example of trying to talk to a congressperson on the Hill about educational inequality in the context of urban underfunding. Right. Now the person was kind of like not caring, but I, of course, getting inside information, this person cared about military and workforce. So one of the kind of stories was to connect the dots to say, well, you actually know in these urban areas that because of educational inequality, the entrance exams to the military, like people are not able to actually meet the criteria to even be eligible. So this workforce development kind of space that you're interested in is being directly affected by the underfunding of these underserved areas. So it's not just like urban kids and DEI, it's actually directly related. Now, that was one example of an effective thing, but I think that there are many other stories that we're hearing where, leaders of higher ed, including our own institution, where despite having the evidence and the knowledge, there are other pressures that are in play. People are making decisions against their own interests. My people, the psychologists, or our people, have found, if you look at history, that if to me, the power of evidence is not changing individual hearts and minds, it's changing structure and policy. So the idea of school integration would have never happened if we were just waiting for people to change their minds about there had to be enough evidence and an evidence base, even though there's lots of things about the evidence base there that can be contested or complicated. There had to be evidence that was enough to actually push forward some structural and policy changes that then led to the hearts and minds changing, because once people were able to have meaningful interaction with others, it didn't happen like this. That the value of that became more apparent to some who then began to be fighters for that cause, but they didn't begin that way, and the waiting for them to change their minds because of good storytelling wouldn't have happened. So to me, I think we also need to make sure we're acknowledging, and this is to me an exciting piece about NCID. It has always been about research for institutional change, even though we know a part of institutional change is appealing to, like the example with the congressperson, helping them connect the dots with something that they actually don't realize is connected. But that can't be it can't be only at the individual level. It has to be enough to push evidence that makes it hard to not engage in policy and structural change. So, on days where I'm feeling cranky, I'm thinking about the spine piece, because one of the reasons that I get excited as I meet with my counterparts at other science societies, on a regular basis, is that, we share a frustration that higher ed institutions are right now not showing that kind of spine. If we look at Northwestern and Harvard and the institutions that are making deals with the federal government, Virginia, I'm like, oh, I have two places, that's my alma mater. Like thinking about places where you see those, that higher ed is preemptively acquiescing to those pressures. I think that there is opportunity space for collectives. I think one of your earlier questions was about collaborations. It can't just be at the individual institutional level. The institutions or people within them have to collaborate with their professional societies, with foundations, with community organizations too, because we're up against a form of the challenge, at least that modern higher education hasn't faced before.
Yes, brilliantly said. I'm thinking of Celeste Watkins, who's the dean of the Ford School, talks about kind of this anticipatory obedience that we're seeing. So it's not even just, cutting the deal. It's actually, before you even ask, which is, I think, particularly risky in this space. Let me, Paul Carando, as provost, once said, want to make sure the trains run on time. And someone spoke up and said, Paul, that's Mussolini. Who said that? And it's one of the things I love about Michigan is even the provost will take it on the chin if you're quoting a person. But do you have one more?
We can do
question.
one more.
Okay, we have one more.
As someone who's summoning the courage, and you should, I want to, Tammy, you made reference to the fact that institutional power to resist is really attenuated through system level power. In other words, in Northwestern caves, the bigger problem is that the system needs to defend itself collectively. We've learned that Harvard, even Harvard, Yale, all of these places are vulnerable unless we somehow work at a different level to articulate our values. And I think that's one of the lessons of the current moment, is how easily we can be picked off. I mean, the first thing they did was they got rid of 2 or 3 presidents based on a congressional hearing. And it happened so fast and it seemed so easy. So then they go after institutions and they picked on the big ones. And when they start to fold, what we need is across the professions, across higher ed, is a much more concerted effort to defend what we value. And that's difficult because the first thing you learn about higher ed in the United States is we don't have a system. It's just a collection of things we say. So I just want to reinforce that it's not all going to be resolved by one institution taking a heroic stance.
We have one more. Yeah.
So first of all, I want to thank the convening of the panel. Great talk. My mentor, Dr. Willis Patterson, really looked at this organization, NCID, as a beacon, and he'd been trying to get us to connect with you all for some time. My family, we run a micro-institute. It's family-based, where we have taught our son, he's 16 now, but when he was just a baby, quantum mechanics and particle physics and music theory, all braided through one spine. It's really science as a second language. And it's at our micro-institute, it's called the Robeson Group. And we've always been interested in doing some of the heavier lifting at home so that, in that sort of P20 pipeline, or in the pre-K through 12 pipeline, the children are advanced much further along. And so when you see learning happening in the home, I think it really changes the trajectory. My question is, are you interested in partnering with other organizations that are, say, university adjacent, ones that are taking novel approaches to education. We've seen enormous gains, and of course my wife got her degree here in 2005. And so as a personality psychologist, she is there at home documenting the arc of all that we've been able to do. My son was named the ambassador to CERN in Geneva, Switzerland. And we've done lots of programs with NASA, and we had a chance to meet with Dr. Alec Gallimore here. And we were even asked to write a paper with Dr. John Foster. But it's been difficult, very difficult to get institutional buy-in to these early conversations. And so one of the things that we see as a real opportunity in this AI world, because as a family, we are pre-AI, so we did a lot of that heavy lifting, a lot of that advanced scholarship at home, and it's been difficult, but it's ultimately extremely rewarding. And but we have a trained University of Michigan talent in our house, and our son, he wants to come here to Michigan. But I want to know, are you open to having relationships with families that are doing, some of this early research at home to make it better for students once they get here? So, and if so, but yeah, are you looking at families is my question.
In some ways, it's hard to say what is NCID doing, because a lot of the work we do is supporting scholars who do many different things. So I don't want to rule out that there might be scholars affiliated with us or funded by us who are doing work with families. We do not have anything currently going with families, but we do often, I think you came around lunchtime, but this morning we heard Dr. Bowman talk about how sort of a strategic approach to cultivating partnerships on campus and beyond was kind of foundational to the way we thought about NCID in the first place. So definitely a conversation that would be worth having.
I just have to say something. We often contribute to Dr. King the phrase about moral universe and bending towards justice and all that. Martin Luther King Jr. borrowed that phrase from an abolitionist in the 1850s who offered that in a sermon. It's associated with King. It's in his monument there in Washington now. But here's what you need to remember about the 1850s. Bending a steel rod back then took place in a very hot environment with a big fire and people banging on that damn thing, banging and banging and banging until it finally gave way and bent. If we're thinking that this moral universe is going to bend our way just because God wills it, I think we're going to be disappointed perpetually through our lifetimes. This is hard work that involves hammering, that involves staying there in the heat and continuing to push on the rod until it bends in the direction we think it should go. This moment is a real test for us, I think, in that regard, because it's tempting to want to look away. It's tempting to not read all these things or hear all these things. We can't afford to do that. We have to keep our focus riveted on what's going on.
Thank you. All right. So just to very quickly close this down, I think my wife studies political institutions, and she always describes the rules and those things as like the skeleton, and the norms and the culture is the muscles of that that really make the thing work. And one of the things I think about Pat Gurn, I think about Phil, I think about Tabby and Liz and John and Lester. When I describe these people as being strong people, I think one of the things that brings that strength is they really do create this culture that we are doing research to make the world better, and we're really in this. And so I just want to personally thank all of you for creating a culture where doing deep, serious research about diversity and its benefit to society has been at the core of what this thing has been about from the very beginning. And I think it's had a huge impact on my life. I think I'm probably in the lives of all the people in the room. And I guess personally want to thank all of you for that.
And I think we owe you thanks too, Scott. I mean, the work that you've done on diversity, the books that you've written, the lectures that you've given around the country, around the world, have made a difference for a lot of people. So thank you as well.
And Liz, do we want to give Liz the last word here?
Yeah, as current director, I get the privilege of having the last word. And so I want to share just a few thoughts and themes that came up for me over the day, and I won't spend too much time on that. But then there's also some people I want to thank. So the first thing I want to say is that one of the things that was joyful about today for me is I feel like it was a chance to tell NCID's untold story. And you know, multiple times today we've talked about the Inclusive History Project, the IHP, and kind of the foundational belief that we have to honestly look at the past in order to understand where we are and how to move forward from that. And in carrying out the IHP, I think when we went into it, we thought, because of that emphasis on repair, most of what we'd be studying and learning about were things that needed to be repaired. But one of the joyful things has been that we've also learned about these incredible unsung contributions. And, you know, we've discovered people that aren't kind of part of the narrative of what the history of the university is. We've been able to partner with the other campuses, which is a relationship that I think really hasn't gotten enough attention. So to me, today was one of those moments of being able to reclaim our history in a way that I hope everyone here feels the way I do, that it has kind of given us some strength and perspective to go on. Another thing that I saw today is how NCID provides this home for people who might not feel at home in other places in the university. And so it's a home for kinds of research that might not fit neatly within a discipline. It's home for certain scholars who might feel, either because of who they are or what they do or what they want to do, that they're not getting the support they need. For interdisciplinary scholars, as we've talked about at length here. And you know, so I think if you go to our website and see all the things we do, you'll come away with a lot of information, but that kind of key contribution isn't visible. Like, that's what you see kind of on the ground, which I think we've been able to see here today. Similarly, one of the things that really popped out for me, and I hadn't thought about it until today, is NCID produces leaders. One of my themes for this year is that I want everyone to know NCID is still here. We're still doing the work that we're here to do. We're here to support you. But the other is demonstrating our impact. And I feel like all the leaders that built the NCID and then the people who have had time here and gone on to provide this really transformative leadership, that's another part of our story that's not told, and it's a really important part of our impact. And then finally, I think that, you know, I've said a couple times this year has been hard. I think there have been times when I've talked to people where the events of the last year have led them to question their loyalty to the university as an institution. And one of the things that really stood out for me today is that NCID is a Michigan story. Like, maybe it's one of the most prototypical or the most illustrative Michigan stories we could tell, because I feel like this is a place where our stated values, not values that we've always lived up to, but values that we've continued to say, these are our values. Those values have met this commitment to excellence, to rigor in an inclusive and visionary sense. And in NCID, those two things come together in a beautiful way and show the power of both of what it means to have a commitment to these values and a commitment to the power of scholarship. And then finally, the last thing I'll say before the thank yous is, you know, we do a lot of webinars. If you're here, maybe you've come to some of our webinars. And one of the things we try to do is end with a call to action. I don't feel like there's a specific call to action today, but I feel like John has left us with kind of a vision of what the next action is. And you know what that action is going to look different for everyone in this room because we're in different places. You know, this was such a wide-ranging conversation. I can't say these are the steps you should do. But I feel like John just did this beautiful job of closing our panel with kind of a vision of what it's going to take, what we're called to do, that we are kind of picking up the baton from the people who came before us, and we're doing that with the people who will come after us in mind. And when I talk about, you know, having a purpose-driven career, to me, that's what it's about, like being able to play a meaningful role in that chain. So I hope you are all leaving today with that kind of sense of purpose. So I can't leave without saying some thank yous, because I think you probably all know an event like this can't happen without a lot of help. So I'll start, you know what, I'm gonna start by thanking Dr. Edmund Graham, who is too modest to tell you that he's Dr. Edmund Graham.
Won't even come in the room.
But I think so much of what has happened today has come about through his vision for this day and his leadership. And at this point, I feel like he is the person who holds the most knowledge about our history, and I look forward to the ways that's going to play out in our continued work together. So thank you, Edmund. I want to thank our wonderful panelists, you know, both for the work on the panel today and also for all that they've contributed to the university. I want to thank our leadership, Dean Rosie Ceballo and Provost Laurie McCauley. To me, it was incredibly powerful, and I keep using that word, but I'm running out of words, to hear them articulate that commitment to our work and kind of the bigger effort that it's part of. I think that's the kind of statement that we've all been wanting to hear, and it was a real honor to hear it made in our space. I want to thank Phil Bowman for his foundational work in founding the center and for giving us our keynote today, and Scott Page, who I think will have a second career as a talk show host. I want to thank John Burkhart and Tabby Chavis for their past leadership of the center as well. And I'll add to that Pat Gurin, who couldn't be here today, but whose many contributions are so meaningful to us. And I want to thank Dr. Montz for kind of being part of that initial vision that put us where we are today. So many people, but let me just close with thanking the people who are here in person and online, thanking our incredible NCID staff that did so much of this work, specifically our planning committee, Emma Soberano, Janine Kapsuris, Jennifer Junkermeyer-Khan, Shanice Holmes, Hamida Bhagirathi, Edmund Graham, and El Costanzo. Some of them have been up here today and you've seen their faces, and others of them have worked behind the scenes to make this a really beautiful day. And then finally, I want to thank the service staff, the caterer, Pullman Commons, you know, we count on those parts of the day going seamlessly, and that happens because of real professionals who know what they're doing. So I want to acknowledge that and make that visible and extend our gratitude to them. So thank you all. I hope that you can stay a little longer with us for a reception where there will be refreshments and more opportunity to connect, renew connections, make new connections. And I hope you're leaving here today energized and inspired, because I am. Thank you.